For the next 3 hours, we will descend into a nightmarish realm of twisted tales and disturbingly true experiences. Be warned, you will hear stories that may just make you think twice about the horrors that come from the abyssal well. The stories I'm about to tell you are not for the faint of heart, but if you're brave enough to listen, you might just survive the dark web. Before we begin, if you're watching on your TV, please pull out your phone and please like this video. I never do AI voiceovers. I'm just a regular guy with a deep voice who likes horror. If you don't do this, you probably won't see any of my videos again. So hit the sub bell if you like these types of videos. I ordered myself on the dark web. I know you're frowning. The title is weird. I know, but if you could just give me a moment, I'll explain. I'll have to be fast though. I don't know how close they are. Essentially, I ordered myself on the dark web. I'm a drug user, I'll admit it. Weed is my usual go-to, but I buy that off of my friend. If, however, I want to get something a little heavier, like acid or coke, I just order it off the dark web. It's surprisingly simple. A few clicks, some Bitcoin transfers, and then boom, I have it in my P.O. box. But I'm also a curious guy. The dark web has always intrigued me. Up until a few days ago, I had only been on there to buy drugs off sites some of my friends gave to me. But late one night, I was sober and at home, which was a rare thing for me. So, since I was bored, I decided to boot up my Tor browser and try and see what sort of fucked up shit I could find on the dark web. If you've ever been on the dark web, you'll know that you can't just search up red rooms or hitmen for hire and get results. No, you have to find links to these websites first. So, I hopped back onto Google again to try and find some links to a messed up website. I know it's weird that I was actively searching for the worst, but as soon as I got on the dark web that night, I had a sense of morbid curiosity overcoming me. Anyway, I spent a little while trying to find some links. Anything that I found, though, was either too tame for me or the links didn't work. At this point, I was about ready to give up, and I wish I had. But in one final attempt, I clicked on Reddit, hopping onto r/deepweb. I didn't think I would find anything, so I just scrolled through hot for about half an hour before sorting by new. Then I found it. One simple text post titled, Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Surfaces. In the text box in the post was what seemed to be a random assortment of numbers and letters. ZYYTCAUBKQ2Y3, for those of you curious. It took my tired brain a second to figure out what it was, but I realized pretty quickly it was a link, presumably to a hitman website. So, I decided to paste the link into my dark web browser, and what do you know? It worked. But before I decided to go any further, I figured I should go back to OP's profile to see if they have posted any other dark web links. However, when I went back to the post in question, OP's profile was deleted. Weird. Anyway, I reopened my dark web tab and hopped onto the site. Up along the top of the website was its name, Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Services, and next to it, what looked to be a skull inside of a crosshair. I chuckled when I saw that. The site must be fake. Upon scrolling down, however, I was not disappointed. There was a paragraph of white text on a black background, and a small box to the right of the text that just said, Place an order. The text was the main part, though, as it took up most of the page. It read, Slayer's Assassinations and Life-Ruining Services offers everything from acid attack, crippling blinding, castration, torture, beatings, and good old death. We have the lowest prices out of any other company running similar services, and we are worldwide. We have a dedicated and experienced group of staff based all around the world. So if you need someone to be assassinated, or maybe you just want them scarred for life, don't hesitate to contact us. Again, I laughed. This had to be satire, right? Hell, I was even tempted to order it on someone just to see what would happen. Ironically, I actually have a half-decent job, so I can afford to. Better not to risk it, though, I thought to myself. I was about to close my computer and call it for a night when I heard a knock at my door. I live alone, so it was unusual to get visitors, especially so late at night. But when I opened my door, it was just my good buddy Mark, who also happened to be my plug. As I opened the door, he didn't hesitate to let himself in and shove a big baggie full of pot in my face. This dude is the best shit I've had in a minute. We gotta try some. I couldn't say no. Cut to a couple hours later. It's early morning and Mark and I are chilling on my couch, both blazed as fuck. He suddenly decides to get up, and I assume he's going to get some leftover pizza, but he walks over to my desk and computer. Slayer's assassinations. Are you gonna kill someone or something? He mutters. What? I reply. Your computer, dude. It's got some hacker shit on it. It's the dark web, man. Don't fuck with it. At this point, I'm still on my couch, half asleep and not paying full attention. However, I sat up pretty fast when he said the words, "Hey man, let's order a hitman on you." I hopped up and walked over to my PC. Part of my brain was screaming no. What the fuck are you doing? But the majority of my brain, which was also the high part, was thinking about how funny it would be to order a hitman on myself. So I agreed. I made him get out of my chair though, because I didn't want him seeing what my credit card numbers were as I transferred some Bitcoin. At the end, after I wrote down all my personal details, like my address, age, and even a photo, I had to select what I wanted to happen to me. I just selected plain old assassination, as it was actually cheaper than some of the other things. I could have paid an extra couple grand to be beaten before my death, but even my high brain didn't want to splash the cash too much on my own death. God, this is ridiculous. Anyway, I placed the order and then replied to the confirmation email, and boom, it was done. A couple of clicks and I had ordered myself on the dark web. Mark and I laughed about it for a while, but then he left about an hour later and I fell asleep not too long after. I woke up around 9 a.m., which meant I got at least 6 hours of sleep, even if I felt like I got 3. I got up and out of bed, threw on some track pants and a cotton shirt. Yes, I sleep naked, and brewed myself a coffee before sitting down to play some games and just enjoy my Sunday. You can imagine how shocked I was when I saw that I had ordered my death the previous night. Even though I thought the site was bullshit, I still felt a pit open up in my stomach. Even when I'm high, I usually can make sensible decisions. I chuckled, not like I could remember it anyway, but I guess Mark's new shit was really good. I would assume a normal human being would do something else, but I was still kind of out of it from the night before, so I just carried on with my day. I was a little more paranoid, sure, but as I said, I just assumed it was bullshit. I even laughed at the email I got from the website saying that their hitman has been dispatched and was on its way. It was like ordering a package off Amazon. I was tempted to email back and ask for same-day delivery, but I didn't need to ask because that's exactly what I got. I didn't see it arrive, but around the time I started to cook myself a shitty dinner, I noticed a blacked-out sedan parked on the other side of the road from my house. I didn't live in a rural area, but there is a lot of trees and bushes between each of the houses on my street, so I'd be surprised if any other house saw the car except for mine. At this point, I was freaking out. What if the site was real? Even though I'm a big guy, I was freaking out. I don't own any weapons, aside from a slightly larger than average kitchen knife. Fuck it, I'm confronting it, I decided. I put on a hoodie and slid the knife into my front pocket. before waltzing on out of my house and walking right up to the driver's side window of the vehicle. Even I was astonished at my own courage. Knocking on the window, nothing happened. It was rather anticlimactic. I was fully prepared to have a fight for my life, all because I did something really dumb while I was baked. But, like I said, nothing happened. I even put my head right up to the window, as if there was a reflection to try and get a better look to see what's inside. I could barely see what was inside of the car, but all I could make out were 2 empty seats. No one was even inside. I had got all hyped up for nothing. I decided to wait out by the car for a bit, but after half an hour or so, I was hungry and had to go back inside to take my dinner out of the oven, and looking back out the window and the car being gone, I didn't even hear it go. Yes, I'm eating dinner with all of my curtains closed and doors locked, I muttered to myself. I had just started to calm down when the power shut off. It was sunny outside, and coupled with the car, I now knew this was the real deal. I had signed my own death warrant. I ran into my upstairs bedroom and locked the door, and then hid under the bed. I couldn't call the cops. What would I say? Oh yes, hello sir. Turns out while super high, I paid $5,000 for some anonymous hitman to kill me, and now he's arrived. Send an officer ASAP, please and thank you. So, I just stayed hiding under my bed, and I still am now. I've been here for an hour now writing this. Think of this as my last journal entry. I know I'm screwed. Just a minute ago, I heard my back door slowly creak open. This piece of writing may seem humorous to you, the reader, but in reality, as you read this, I'm under my bed praying to a God that lost all faith in me years ago to spare me, to let me go. But I know that won't happen. My bedroom door just opened, and I can see a big pair of black boots. I searched my parents' names on the dark web. The videos I found were horrifying. When my friend first introduced me to the dark web, I was amazed at how such an unknown thing could house some of the most illegal things on earth. Up until today, I had only used it for learning how to code and commit small crimes. But after the horrifying videos I just found, I don't think I'll ever use the dark web again. I first met my best friend Alex a little bit after I got into high school. My parents had moved us to a new town and I had no friends. It was lonely at first, but I got used to it. We moved because they were paranoid after many murders occurred in our town. I thought this was weird, moving across the country over that, but I let it go. The reason Alex and I became friends so quickly was because we both had a shared interest in the internet and everything it had to offer. I was a gaming addict and a tier 3 Pokemon subscriber, while he was much more of a coder and developer. 2 years later, we were still best friends, but now we were much older and smarter. Alex had discovered the dark web, and he was obsessed with it. He pretty much spent every hour of the day on it, searching through anything you could imagine. There was nothing wrong with this, but one search he made was the biggest mistake of his entire life. I remember waking up to dozens of text messages from him one morning. This wasn't normal. Alex wasn't a very social person, and it was very hard to get words out of him. I opened my phone to see what he had messaged me. Dude, Jack, you have to come over right now. This is important. Jack, please wake up. This is urgent. Where are you? These were only some of the messages, but the rest were very similar, with them all being urgent and that I needed to go to his house immediately. My parents were both at work still, so I went over to Alex's house. When I arrived, there were 4 cop cars parked in front of his house, and there were dozens of people and news vans standing out front. I made my way through the crowd, and Alex's mother told the police to let me inside. I could see tears rolling down her cheeks as she opened the door. "What's going on, Mrs. Gonzalez?" I asked. "Alex is missing," she said as she started crying. My heart sank. How could this happen? He had just texted me earlier that morning. That was when it hit me. What if he was trying to warn me? What if his text messages were related to his disappearance? Still in shock, I walked up to one of the detectives in the kitchen. "Is Alex going to be okay?" I asked. "Of course he is. He's going to be just fine. We're going to find him very soon," one of the detectives responded. Something about that response was off. It was like I knew he was wrong. Deep down, I had this slight feeling that I wasn't going to see him ever again. I remembered the text messages, however, and pulled out my phone to show it to the detective. "He texted me this morning. What if this has something to do with him going missing?" I said swiftly. As he began reading them, his expression quickly changed. It was like it got worse. He told me they needed to keep my phone for now to investigate the text messages and said they would give it back to me later. I stayed around the house for a while, not just because I missed Alex, but because I wanted to comfort his parents. They cared about me a lot, and it hurt to see them like that. His mother couldn't stop crying. Eventually, however, I went into Alex's room to see if I could find anything that might give a clue about why he went missing. I searched through everything, but I found nothing. And then I noticed something. Alex's computer was on, but his monitor was turned off. I looked for the button to turn it on and hit it. As the screen lit up, my heart sank. He was on the dark web. Obviously, this was normal, but for some reason, he had dozens of different tabs opened. I knew this part wasn't normal, so I closed the door and locked it and began going through them. At first, it was all pretty usual for him, but then things started to get weird. He had a tab open that was an article about a murder that happened several years ago. The article said that it was a woman who was found dead in her apartment. Her body was mutilated, cut up, and covered in acid. I nearly threw up reading it and seeing the horrifying pictures of the crime scene. Not wanting to see any of it anymore, I switched the tab, just to reveal another article about another murder. Confused, I quickly went through the rest of the tabs he had open, and they were all the same thing. They were all about some type of murder or crime. The one that stuck out to me the most, however, was one about a murder that happened 2 years ago. At first, it seemed pretty normal, but as I read further, I realized what it was. It was about the murder of our neighbor that prompted us to move away. Confusion quickly swept over me. How did Alex know about this? I never told him about it, because to me, it wasn't that important. I figured it must have just been a strange coincidence. But then I saw the last search he had made on his computer. It was my last name. Horrified and confused, I quickly stumbled out of his room and back to the living room. "Is everything all right?" Alex's mother said, sniffing away her tears. "Yeah, I just need to go home for dinner," I responded. On the way home, so many questions and thoughts filled my mind. Why was he searching up my last name? Did he think that I had something to do with this? That must have been why he was texting me so frantically that morning. If only I could just explain to him that I didn't do anything wrong. But I couldn't. He was still missing, and I had to find out why. When I got home, I raced to my room and slammed the bedroom door shut and got on my computer. I loaded up my Tor browser and turned my VPN on. I knew what I had to do. I began typing in the letters of my last name, becoming more nervous after every letter. When I finally hit enter, nothing happened. It was just a blank screen. Confused, I refreshed the page, but once again, there was nothing. But why did Alex search this if there was nothing? I thought to myself, there must be something out there. I was getting ready to close the tab, thinking I had ran into a dead end, when suddenly the page started to load. It took several minutes, but finally it loaded to reveal hundreds of videos. Immediately, I knew what they were. They were murders, but why did they show up when you searched my last name? I considered just stopping right there and turning back, knowing the horrifying things I would see if I continued on. But I couldn't. I knew this had to be why Alex went missing, so I clicked on the first video. As it started playing, I saw what looked like a woman strapped to a chair in some sort of basement or something. I quickly recognized who it was. It was our neighbor from 2 years ago. I could tell because she had the same heart-shaped tattoo on her neck. She sat there for a minute, struggling, panicking, and screaming for someone to help. However, suddenly, 2 figures walked into frame. At first, I couldn't tell who they were, but as they turned around to face the camera, my heart sank. It was my parents. My father was holding a knife, while my mother was holding a small scalpel. They paused for a moment before they started what was the most horrifying 5 minutes of my entire life. I watched as they cut her into pieces and listened as she begged for mercy, screaming the whole time. Blood filled the room as she took her last breath. When the video ended, it quickly went to another, revealing the exact same room and chair I had seen before. I was traumatized by what I had already seen, and I knew I couldn't watch any more of it. My parents were murderers, and I now knew the real reason we moved away 2 years ago. I knew there was something off about that, but I just never could have imagined that this was the horrifying secret that they had been hiding from me. This whole time, I thought Alex was trying to accuse me of being responsible for these murders, but I was so wrong. He was trying to warn me. I scanned through more of the videos, each in the exact same room. I was just about finished, ready to go to the police so that I could tell them about what I had just seen when I noticed something. There was a new video uploaded today on the website. I quickly clicked on it and pressed play to reveal what looked like a man this time, strapped to the chair. He had a sack over his face, and I couldn't tell who it was. Once again, however, I saw my parents walk into the frame. My father walked up to the man and pulled the sack off his head. At first, I couldn't tell who it was, but then I realized who I was looking at. It was Alex. There is a place much worse than the dark web. The internet is an amazing place. There are endless opportunities, things to see, to read, friends to make, and so much more. But there are bad places too. We all know that, but no one knows the true extent of the terror, the truth. I have to post this here because I don't have long, but I'll tell my story in full. You see, I'm one of those computer kids, fascinated by technology. I could program the universe if you gave me enough money. I get straight A's at school, and my computer science teacher loves me. Safe to say, I'm pretty skilled when it comes to the internet. My knowledge of tech and the internet has led me to a certain fascination with the deep web and dark web. I managed to burrow my way in there a few years back, and I've been a habitual surfer ever since. Despite common tales of snuff and all the disturbing things you hear about, I have not continually seen much extreme stuff on the dark web. Instead, it seems to be a conglomeration of weirdos who want people to shit on them, and occasionally, the odd creep. But overall, the dark web is a small part of the net, with a bunch of empty websites and links floating around in cyberspace. That is, unless you know where to look. I have, out of morbid curiosity, visited places that I perhaps shouldn't have. Once, I was in a chat room, bored out of my mind, and asked a bunch of other nameless, faceless, dark web surfers if they knew of any of the really fucked up places. The responses were disturbing. Links to websites with things I had never heard of. Nuclear warheads for sale, up to 100 million. Live snuff films, hitmen for hire, etc. One of the users even linked me to something called Daisy's Destruction, the title of which was enough to put me off. You see, for desensitized folk, and I too thought myself desensitized, this may not sound like it's overly terrible, but to actually see those things, I can imagine it destroying people. And if you don't have the technological capability of protecting yourself and your information from the bad people, as they often term themselves, you could end up in serious trouble. Not to mention, the feds constantly try to catch people snooping about. It's safe to say the dark web can be a terrible place, a collection of the world's most evil people. And I thought I'd seen it all, but man, I was wrong. There is another kind of terror that few people talk openly about. It's the purest form of fear. And no, it's not the fear of the unknown. It's the one thing all organisms continually try to avoid. It's the fear of it that drives evolution itself. The end of life, the end of everything. It's the fear that we're obsessed with. Apocalypse theories, the big freeze, alien invasions, nuclear war hypothesis, so much more. It's the fear of not existing that we and all other life forms strive to escape. And it's the end that I found. Let's consider the iceberg theory. Roughly 4% of the internet is at the safe zone. Below that is the deep web, which makes up about 90%. Then, at the very bottom of the iceberg is the dark web. But what I found, by comparison, is like the Challenger Deep, the abyssal zone, far beyond the safe and warm light of the internet. It started 2 days ago. I was at the bottom of the iceberg again when I came across a small link. There was nothing special about it other than the fact that it was colored yellow. I clicked it. Suddenly, my computer screen lit up with some kind of 3D simulation, a 360 view, and it looked like the Matrix digital rain. Computer code in a language even I had never seen was pouring, and as it pooled at the bottom of the simulation, it formed a sentence. Access denied. You do not have permission to access the region. Well, I wasn't having that. I grinned wickedly. Game on. I searched around the simulation for anything at all, but the digital rain had seeped away. Suddenly, though, at one end of the simulation, a gap opened. At this point, I was convinced this was some kind of VR video game. I was too busy figuring out if I could get access to wonder whether or not I should. The gap gradually grew wider, letting in blue light from the surrounding area, and I began to see links to documents. They were nearly all named with random strings of letters and symbols, all except one, the archive. I clicked on it. It opened a document titled Earth 4.5 GA 2040 AD, and my interest was immediately captured. I scrolled through the document, which seemed to be a generically basic timeline of the history of the Earth, but with some scientific declarations that I was not familiar with. I realized that it would take me an incredibly long amount of time to scroll through 4 billion years of history, so I searched around for anything else. The pages with the timeline on were surrounded by that same language, one that I didn't know. Aha, in the top right, I noticed what looked vaguely like a search bar. So I clicked on that and typed in 2002, the year of my birth. The pages seemed to shoot upward at Mach 50 before halting on one page, where 2002 was one of the years listed. I was oddly shocked to see that it listed the major events of that year. North Korea admits the development of nuclear weapons in defiance of the treaty. NASA's 2001 Mars Odyssey space probe begins to map the surface of Mars using its thermal emission imaging system, and every other major event that went down in 2002. After scrolling through the following years, they too had all major events listed. What I saw next was unnerving. The years that hadn't happened yet were listed, as were their events. 2021, second wave of disease kills 6 million. My heart was racing. I was eager to read on. 2025, first contact with extraterrestrial life made. 2028, explosion in advanced technology leads to the terraforming of Mars. Climate change solutions proposed to UN with success. 2035, first humans sent to Mars. Even population distribution. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was this just some made up BS? or was it real? I managed to find it easily enough. But was that yellow link temporary? What was something like this doing on the dark web? After several hours of reading about amazing future achievements of humanity, the timeline ended completely at 2040. The end. What? At this point, I relaxed. This surely wasn't real. No way. It was just one of the weirder things on the internet. But as I was about to click off and return to the safe, normal surface web, a message appeared. My screen turned to deep navy blue, and a long string of white words lay before me in a chat room. Hello, Jack, at 2334 Charles Avenue. We are the Veil, Section 20, MW, Earth. We noticed that you found the archive, and props to you. It isn't normally that easy. In fact, you're the second human being to have done so. The first human did it all the way back in February 2014. Both times, your access was made possible because of the sunflower link, which happens every so often. It seems there has been a breach in the code, a result of fairly poor human technology. We're working to fix that. Unfortunately for you, you have accessed our database and reviewed the archive, which you do not have permission to do. Our team are conferring at this moment to decide the best course of action. We are considering your nature. It is okay to make mistakes because you're human. We are not. The moment I had finished reading this, the message vanished and my computer blacked out. It was frozen still. They knew my name, which isn't possible. I never, ever use my real name on the internet. They knew my address, even though I have multiple concrete VPN servers directing my location elsewhere. What the hell? We are not. Slowly, I stood up out of my desk chair, walked over to my bed, and laid down. I switched on my lamp. I felt more comfortable in the light. It's been 2 days. I haven't touched my computer, nor have I heard from the Veil, but I know they feigned their consideration. I've seen what I shouldn't have. I knew the end is coming. I need to escape now. But I didn't just believe them because they knew my name and address. I believed them because they said I was the second human to have discovered them. Using my phone, I scoured the web for the Veil in Section 20, MW Earth, looking for said other human, but nothing came up. But then I tried something else. I searched redacted, and the result was a name and some kind of code. Zahari Ahmad Shah, MH370. That was all. I know what I have to do. I'm sorry. Be warned, the next stories may just make you think twice about which way you swipe on dating apps. Are you tired of failed relationships? Are you ready for something guaranteed to last? Try Bullseye TM. We never miss the mark. 6 girlfriends, 3 casual relationships, and a list of one-night stands longer than anybody would care to admit. That's when I realized it was for me. Todd Martrosh could be very convincing. He had asked me out for drinks for what I assumed was a business proposal. I had never guessed that it would wind up becoming a discussion about our love lives. I like to think I've had a pretty good track record when it comes to my exes. None of them were crazy, and every time we broke up, it was for the right reasons and it was mutual. I kept telling myself that it just wasn't the right time. Todd was trying his best to convince me that time was right now. Chelsea isn't like any other girl I've ever met. We laugh at the same jokes. We have the same goals. It's like we're meant to be, Todd explained. I still don't know how this is any better than Tinder or eHarmony, I argued. The app itself didn't look like anything special. The icon was a bright red heart surrounded by 2 rings, and the sign-up page reminded me of one of those surveys from 16 magazine. I promised him I would give it a try, mostly because he wouldn't stop singing its praises. When I got home, I found that the same was happening on the review page for the dating site. In fact, during the 3 weeks that it had been out, Not a single bad report had been made on it. Not a single 4-star review even. People generally all agreed that the app never got their matches wrong. That struck me as odd. 100% customer satisfaction, guaranteed successful. Already, it had achieved Best New Dating Site of 2018 on both Google Play and the App Store for iPhone. Those kind of statements made it sound like the app was infallible. I have to admit, my curiosity was piqued, and I viewed debunking the site as some sort of challenge. I decided to run a test and began answering the questions on the survey in the most obscure way possible. I lied about my age, my looks, even my sex. As I got further through, the questions started getting more and more specific, asking for experiences, past relationships, that sort of thing. I made up as much as I could and clicked submit. It only took a few moments for their bot to give me a generic thank you message and reassure me that their algorithm was analyzing the results of my survey and it would take at least 24 hours to come back with a match. I wasn't expecting anything to come of it. Then I figured I could chalk it up to just people wanting to find love and believing the program had found their soulmate. Then my results came back. Honestly, I was surprised. The person the app matched me with was perfect. We shared common interests, goals, and they even fit my appearance preferences right down to ideal height. That's why I was shocked. This person shouldn't match me 100%. I had fabricated my answers as much as possible, but it was like the app completely disregarded what I'd said. Somehow, Bullseye had shot through all the bullshit and hit me dead center with the match of my dreams. I debated with myself about how to proceed. How far did I really want to test this? Ultimately, I decided to push forward with my effort to debunk this thing. The makers of the app had designed it so that, unlike any other dating apps, you couldn't message each other. Their approach was to have people fully take each other face to face instead of building preconceptions via text. To arrange the date of your life, you simply input your availability, activity preferences, and spending parameters into the in-app calendar. From there, the app would do the work of planning an itinerary, select a time and date that worked for both parties, and then send a notification of where to be and when, as well as suggested attire. I input the necessary information and waited for the notification. My plan was to scope out the location and my prospective date to see if the person who showed up was in fact the person it paired me with. I couldn't put a finger on it, but something about this just felt off and I wanted to figure out what. With a bit of time to kill before bed, I decided to dig around for more information on the app. There really wasn't much to find, which was kind of expected with a beta. I remembered seeing the app was owned by Veneer Inc. when I'd skimmed the terms and agreements, but a search for them just brought up some unrelated mythology info. I couldn't come up with anything else to dig into, and it was late anyways, so with that dead end, I shut down my laptop and went to sleep. The next morning, I got up and started a pot of coffee. Checking my phone, I didn't see any new notifications, so I grabbed a quick shower and went to my home office. I shot a quick text off to Todd to let him know I'd given the app a try and proceeded to lose myself in work for the next few hours. Todd ended up calling me later to discuss the business we should have talked about over dinner the prior evening, and once again, our conversation circled back around to Bullseye. I'm telling you, man, you won't regret it. When is your date? Maybe sometime we could do a double up with you guys, Todd inquired. Slow down, dude. I'm still waiting to get notification for details, so I'm not sure yet, but I'm excited to see what all this is about. Who knows? Maybe I'll meet my Chelsea. I laughed. We switched back in conversation to cover a few last-minute business things and hung up. I'd skipped lunch earlier, so I decided to order in dinner and call it an early night. Just as I sat down to eat, my phone buzzed and alerted the notification chime. I unlocked it to find a message from Bullseye. Guess who had a date? The notification had info regarding the time and place of my date. Café d'Amour, a perfectly generic French restaurant at a street I'd never heard about. That's where I would allegedly meet my match made in heaven. Having at least a certain amount of experience in the dating world, I developed a routine. Not something I was too proud of, treating each date the same way, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I threw on a shirt, Not so fancy I would look like a tryhard, but also nice enough to impress. I checked Bullseye for any new notifications, cancellations, change in venue, that sort of thing, but there were none. Cautiously optimistic, I hailed a cab. Driving myself would be a disadvantage should there be an opportunity for drinks. The place was awkwardly situated close to the outskirts of town, but looked well kept and on the higher end of restaurants and bars. I paid the inflated cab fare and headed inside, checking myself in the window reflection to make sure I looked decent. It wasn't the largest place I'd ever seen, just about 10 tables scattered around inside, far enough apart so that a private conversation could be held uninterrupted. It struck me as odd that each table was only meant for 2 people, clearly decorated for romance. A waiter greeted me as I entered, confirmed that my booking was made through the Bullseye app, and informed me that my date had already arrived. Each table was occupied by 2 people, all seemingly on a date, impeccably dressed. The waiter escorted me to one near the back, the only one with a free chair. I knew she was my date before she even introduced herself. "Hey, I'm Isabel," she said as she embraced me in a hug. "Sorry, maybe a bit too forward? I'm not really used to these things." "That's all right," I chuckled. I never mind a good hug. No sooner had I sat myself down at the table before a waiter arrived with drinks for the both of us, a white Russian for her and a tequila sunrise for myself, my guilty pleasure favorite. "Did you order these?" I asked. "No, but they somehow got my favorite." She looked over at mine and smirked. "I guess you also enjoy the fancy drinks, huh? What kind is that?" "No idea how they knew that," I responded, mildly embarrassed. "Hey, no judgment from this side of the table. People should be allowed to enjoy whatever the heck they want." We quickly got to know each other, sharing the usual superficial details about our lives. Truth be told, it felt as if I already knew her. She matched my dream girl to a T. "How did you end up on Bullseye anyways?" "Through a colleague who may or may not be too involved in my love life." "Yeah, I know the feeling. Always being pushed out the door. It's funny how the people in our lives think they can live it better than ourselves." In meeting my date, I had almost forgotten about my initial suspicion. I was simply having too good a time with her. "It's a bit strange though, don't you think?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "Well, I got matched with you pretty much instantly." "So?" "I mean, I couldn't find much information about this app online, except that the company is named Veneer, so it struck me as strange how, well," she paused, "you kind of matched my requirements perfectly." I smiled, a mixture between being flattered, but also how strange it was that she matched my requirements perfectly, despite having put in nothing but false information. My smile quickly faded. "Sorry, is that too much?" No. It's just that you're right. It's incredibly strange. You also match perfectly." "Really?" I couldn't tell if she was happy or nervous. To be honest, all the personal info I put in my app is false, even my own gender. That being said, can't be many fish in the Bullseye sea. I noticed one of the other guests had been staring intently at me while I was talking. As soon as I noticed, he quickly returned to his conversation. "Hey, is that guy staring at us?" she whispered to me. I turned around to get a glimpse of another man quickly redirecting his gaze. It had become oddly quiet in the restaurant. "You sure he wasn't just checking you out?" I joked. She playfully rolled her eyes at me. "I wish. There was a woman earlier who also seemed a bit too interested in our conversation." "Yeah, I noticed someone else as well." At that point, the music fully came to a halt, and people were no longer sipping their drinks, but quietly whispering about something. The waiter approached our table with a new pair of drinks and an assortment of appetizers. "These are on the house," he said, "as a thank you for volunteering with Bullseye." "What do you mean Before I could finish my question, the waiter had returned to the front desk. "I feel like we're being pranked or something," Isabel said. "Yeah, maybe," I responded, not fully convinced. An uncomfortable knot had started developing in my stomach. Something was very wrong. But my gut is telling me something is going on here, and it'd be a good idea for us to get out. I stood from my chair as Isabel glanced around at the other diners who now all had their full attention on us. I could see a look of unease washing over her face. She began to rise from her own chair. "Hey, come on, just relax. Everything is on the level, I promise. You do still trust me, don't you?" A familiar voice came from behind me, and I turned to find myself face to face with Todd. "Look, How long have we been friends now? Do you think I would steer you wrong? I wouldn't have recommended Bullseye if I thought there was anything to worry about. He was dressed up in a nice white tux with his hair slicked back and a smile spread wide across his face. Listen to him, Isabel. You can have what Todd and I have been blessed with. Real, genuine love. I promise. The ceremony is perfectly safe. A woman I hadn't noticed before was standing behind Isabel when I turned to see the news source of the voice. Chelsea, why are you here? As soon as I heard Isabel speak that name, I knew it couldn't possibly be a coincidence that Todd and I had been matched with two women who were also friends. Todd and Chelsea began moving toward our table as they were joined by all the other cafe patrons who had left their seats. What's going on here? I asked Todd, demanding an explanation. I stood up to confront him, and then he suddenly grabbed my shoulder and forced me back into my chair. Please, I told you there's no need to worry. Everything is perfectly fine. After the ceremony, you two lovebirds will be together forever. The way he said it told me that this was not something I wanted to be part of any longer. I did the only thing I could think of and told Isabel to run. She didn't have time to respond as we were close to being surrounded. She simply rose from her chair and spun toward the door in a single motion, and I followed closely behind. I could see now why we'd been seated near the back. We had to somehow slip past almost every person there to make an escape. I was honestly impressed by how far Isabel made it before they had pinned her down. She was almost to the Madrid station when someone tackled her and they fell to the floor. I barely made it half as far myself before I was also taken down and dragged back to our table. Then the group started to chant, "You were found worthy and chosen for the ceremony. You are destined for each other. We never miss the mark." Chelsea rested a hand on Isabel's shoulder, and I just barely realized what was happening before the syringe in her hand plunged into Isabel's neck. Hey, what are you? Isabel's words trailed off, and her head rolled to the side. Todd gave me a look of disappointment. I really thought you'd cooperate. That is why I picked you when they selected me to find a new candidate. Fortunately, there are ways to make this work. He began to grin wider as he pulled a second syringe from his pants pocket and took a step towards me. Ceremony was the first word that I recalled when consciousness found me. Instinct kicked in and I began to struggle, expecting to feel the strain of ropes around my wrists and ankles, but warmth and cloth were all that held me in place. I sat up and kicked the blankets away. The room was small and decorated like a 2-star hotel in Middle America. I scanned the gaudy decorations and faded wallpaper as I stepped onto vinyl flooring made to look like wood paneling. The door, large and the color of steel, was the only thing out of place besides the window to my left, which reminded me of the kind you might find in a police interrogation room. My feet had barely touched the cold floor before three things sent me diving back for the covers. Isabel was still unconscious in the bed I'd woken up in. We were both completely naked, and we were being watched. When I was beneath the blanket, Isabel began to stir, and then to panic. "It's all right, we're all right." I tried to sound reassuring, but I don't think it registered. "Where am I?" She looked me in the eyes, and despite her fear, I could see in her eyes that she was upset with herself for excluding me. "Where are we?" she amended. It didn't take long before she reached the same conclusions as I, and although we hardly knew each other, she felt compelled to move closer to my body for safety. "Why'd they bring us here?" she whispered. I could feel her heartbeat speeding up as we lay there together, confused and scared. "I'm not sure, but the best thing we can do is wait and watch for a moment to fight back," I told her. She turned her head so that our faces were close enough for her to probably taste the alcohol lingering on my breath. "You're pretty level-headed for someone who's been kidnapped, stripped naked, and put in bed with a stranger. Is this a particularly good time to flirt?" I teased. It actually felt good to lighten the mood, especially since we had no clue what might happen next. To be honest, I've been on some pretty shit dates and in some pretty shit relationships. Trust me, I'm terrified, but it's not exactly new territory. This doesn't even rank in my top 5. That's terrible. I started to turn my head away, but she placed a finger on my chin to stop me. "You know, up until they struck me in the neck, I was having a great time. I felt like I've known you my whole life." She leaned in to kiss me, but before our lips could touch, a loud burst of static filled the room. Covering my ears did nothing to muffle the noise. And when it finally stopped, a few moments later, a light behind the two-way mirror came on, illuminating a group of at least 8 behind the glass with Todd front and center. God damn it, Matt. I told you to fix the speakers before we use this room again. This hasn't been my top priority, as you know, Todd. James told me. The sound cut out, though we could see the argument between Todd and Mark play out beyond the glass. When they finished, Todd took 3 deep breaths, smiled, and motioned for the microphone to be turned back on. It was a composure tactic I'd seen him do countless times before. It made me sick to think that I knew the person sitting next to me in bed, someone I'd known for less than a day, better than the man I'd known for years. Sorry about that. Now, you two seem to be getting along just fine without intervention, but the sad truth is that you've circumvented the process. Your connection has the potential for flaws. We can't risk you giving Bullseye a bad name by leaving your relationship up to chance. This is insane, Isabel yelled. You can't just put 2 people into a room and force them to fuck because your app is flawed. That's a crude way to look at it, for someone with no idea what they're talking about, Todd sneered. Jesus, make love then, she laughed. I didn't mean to offend your delicate sensibilities. You misunderstand me. Todd made a circular motion in the air. 2 of the men on his left exited the room. This isn't about sex. It's about creating a connection. It's about ensuring you two will be together forever. If you'd only followed the rules, none of this would be necessary. A grinding, squealing sound came in from the metal doors, as if an age-old mechanism was being used for the first time in ages. I put an arm around Isabel as she moved closer. This is real life, not weird science, Todd, I said, though my eyes remained on the door. You can't just create destiny out of thin air. That's where you're wrong, my friend. We held each other tighter, trying to protect each other, even as we sought comfort from each other. Some of the light was blocked by a silhouette of something large, something frightening, something that just couldn't be. As the lights adjusted, I found myself staring at 2 replicas. They looked just like Isabel and I, down to the most intimate of details. It was clear that they were in no way human at all, but how they were different than me or my date, I couldn't quite tell you. I immediately stood up and grabbed the replica of myself before pinning it to the wall. It was strong, more well-built than any machine I'd ever seen, but still, I fought. As you can see, we have no qualms with simply replacing you should we see fit. But things will go a lot more smoothly if you cooperate with us, Todd said over the microphone. The bizarre surrogate grappled me and led me back to the bed. Isabel shivered and tried not to cry as the beings intended to take our place stood near ours and held us in place. Let the ceremony begin, I heard Chelsea announce. I felt my body give way, like I was being pushed into a dark hole and then left to be buried alive. I grabbed a hold of Isabel's hand and screamed, desperate to find a way to fight this. The whole room shivered and shook. The beings in front of my body opened their mouths wide, and a radiant light shot out and blinded me. I heard music. I felt my skin go cold, and then, abruptly, another burst of static erupted and the whole room stopped spinning. The creatures stood transfixed, as though suddenly unable to respond, and I looked toward the opposite side of the glass and heard Todd and his allies screaming incoherently. Isabel was unconscious, so I had to lift her into my arms and run towards the open door. Then I saw another figure standing in the hall, urging me to follow. It was Todd again, and suddenly, all of this was beginning to make sense amid my scattered brain. Follow me if you want to live, he told me. We ran through the corridors of what looked like an abandoned movie studio, a massive storage unit filled with dangling suits that appeared to be made of skin, other replicas that were just waiting to be filled for their evil purposes. Don't look forward, just keep going, he urged me. I kept Isabel close to me and ran towards the stairs. A loud, obnoxious blare hit the room again. We made it outside onto an abandoned country road. Todd joined me a moment later as the whole building began to go up in smoke and then pushed me toward an unmarked car at the edge of the property. Chelsea opened the door and ordered me to hop in as the building exploded behind me, and I closed my eyes and gave a breath of relief. We drove away down the dirt road, and a few minutes later, Isabel awoke and clung to the seat, surprised by the sudden shift in circumstances. Can someone please tell me what's going on? She asked. Todd tossed us a blanket to cover our naked bodies as we drove, and then he told us what he knew about the company that had almost killed us all. They were a cult. They believed they had found the key to unending life and wisdom from a creature they called Veneer. That wasn't its name, of course, but that was the name we gave it. It promised to fill our destiny as humans. All we had to do was just follow its orders, Todd said. We found out soon enough that it wasn't all that was cracked up to be, but by that time, it was too late. They had amassed a name for themselves and were setting things in motion to take over. Those things we saw, those other versions of you and Chelsea, that was just the beginning, I realized. He didn't say a word, but his silence was all I needed to know that it was true. We were dropped off after Chelsea stopped to get us some fresh clothes and told never to speak about Bullseye again. A few weeks later, the app disappeared completely and I returned to my normal life. Tried my hardest to forget about the whole thing and pretended that it was all just a high-strung, drug-induced dream, but each time I did, I would get a notification on my phone from Isabel asking if we could go on another date. Call me a fool for old-fashioned romance, but I finally gave in and even agreed to meet up with her at a Mexican restaurant. The conversation was pleasant, and we both agreed to count it as our first official date. I really want the relationship to work. There's just one thing that is bothering me though, and maybe I'm being paranoid. But when we were at dinner, Isabel seemed to know exactly the right drink to order for me. Maybe I'm remembering things incorrectly, but I don't think I ever told her what it was. I've always been a bit paranoid about meeting strangers, so avoiding the entire array of dating apps was at first a no-brainer. No thank you, I'd say, scoffing in disbelief as dating apps randomly became the new normal. Not for me though. I wasn't about to get murdered by some random hookup. A few months went by, and I watched as all of my friends went on dates. Lots of them. All from one dating app or another. Some of them even got into long-term relationships this way. And, to be honest, all the guys they met seemed totally fine, save for the overzealous few and their unsavory photo messages. Still though, I avoided downloading any and all dating apps like the plague, until I got lonely. Yeah, I know, hypocritical. Sure, I accept it, but it's only gotten harder and harder to meet people these days. Once I was out of university and had started my career, loneliness hit like a brutal hangover. I couldn't expect to stumble into a house party each weekend anymore, and a full day's work exhausted me too much to even try to go out and meet people the normal way. I was convinced I'd be alone forever. So, begrudgingly, I downloaded a dating app, then several more. The concept of swiping a certain way finally made sense to me, and I must admit, I got pretty into it. Is there any easier way to pass the time than to judge potential dating prospects with the flick of a finger? Much time as I spent on these apps, I still shied away from chatting with most of the matches, let alone meeting any of them. Even as I'd given in to this new method of dating, I couldn't distance myself from my initial fears. I listened to a lot of true crime podcasts, so maybe the constant stream of "don't ever let your guard down" in my ears blew a healthy fear of strangers out of proportion. I realize now, though, that my fear wasn't entirely irrational. It may have even saved my life. Listen, I don't claim to be a genius, but I'm fairly smart. I wouldn't meet up with anyone until I felt comfortable, until I felt like I knew them at least enough to make an informed judgment. So when someone I actually knew in real life came up on my screen, I was encouraged. I knew him. I went to high school with him. I felt reasonably safe with the idea of meeting him in person after all these years. I swiped right on his picture and put my phone down to brush my teeth. The screen lit up mere seconds later. We had matched. He swiped to indicate his interest in me as well. My first emotion was surprise. I mentioned that I'd known him, but mostly from afar. I didn't think he'd ever noticed me. Certainly didn't think that he'd be into someone like me. I went to this private school for ultra-rich kids. Worst 4 years of my life socially. But the school was stellar academically. I got a partial scholarship there, and my parents worked day and night to foot the rest of my tuition. That being said, this guy, let's call him Alan, was kind of a douche in high school. He wasn't nearly as bad as the rest of his friends, but he was certainly the stereotypical privileged kid in more ways than one. He barely studied, had a rotating cycle of girlfriends, drove a car that cost more than the down payment on my parents' house, and he got away with whatever he did, whenever he did it. Once I'd processed the fact that we'd matched, another notification came in, a message from Alan. Thinking back on the kind of guy he was, I almost left it on read, but then I thought, maybe I was being harsh. I mean, I wasn't perfect in high school either. Nobody was. I'd always kind of had a thing for him, so maybe I'd like him more now. Maybe he'd like me now. I responded to the message. Before I knew it, we were chatting late into the night. He was actually a decent guy and funny as hell. I finally told him I had to get some sleep. It was nearing 3 a.m. and he asked me if I'd like to meet the next evening for a date. No pressure, of course, only if I was comfortable. I wasn't sure if I was comfortable, but I still typed in, "Sure," smiley face. After all, he seemed nice, was fun to talk to, and most importantly, I knew him. It wasn't like meeting a stranger, and I liked him. I got up the next morning and busied myself with idle house chores until afternoon. I took a long bath, did a mask, picked out my clothes, hair, makeup, the works. I hadn't been on a date for so long, but I fell back into the old ritual with ease. Squeezed into a black mini dress, I teetered out the door on a pair of heels. We met at some gastropub and caught up over dinner and drinks. He'd gone to college too, before taking a position at his family's company. He was doing very well, had grown up, but like me, was lonely now. Alan paid the bill despite my attempt to split it. At the end of the night, he'd ask if I'd like to go back to his place. No pressure, of course, only if I was comfortable. I was probably a bit tipsy because I accepted. Normally, I wouldn't dream of it, not out of some idea of what a proper lady should do, whatever that even means, but because I didn't feel I could trust anyone so quickly. But again, I knew him. Felt like I knew him, I guess. We popped into a liquor store and he let me pick out a 6-pack of ciders. He held the door of the cab open when it picked us up and rushed out to open it again when we arrived at his house. It was a nice place, of course. He handed me an open cider and we hung out on his couch for a while, just talking and sipping our drinks. An hour or so later, we abandoned 6 empty bottles on the coffee table and stole away to his bedroom. We had sex and it was nice. Good, not great, but I mean, is it ever really great the first time with someone new? Afterwards, I started to cram my foot into one of my heels, but he stopped me. Stay the night, he said. Let's just talk for a while. I was caught off guard. In a good way. I agreed. That's when things started to get weird. He got up, came back with mixed drinks. I was pretty thirsty, so I downed it pretty quickly. He sprung off the bed to get me a refill right away. I was a little confused, but I figured we'd already sealed the deal. So it wasn't like he was trying to get me wasted so I'd put out or anything. Still, I sipped the next drink a little slower, and when he got up to go to the bathroom later, I tossed the liquor out the window. Alan refilled my drink again. He was still on his first. He set my drink on the table and started to tickle me. Normally, I'd be beyond annoyed, but he really was cute. We started play fighting a bit, and everything seemed okay. Seemed like maybe we were going to go for round 2, until he pinned me on the bed. Strangely serious look crossed his features. I don't want to hurt you, he said, but he pressed me down into the mattress a little too hard. He let me go though, so I let it go. He was back to the lighthearted, funny, sweet guy I'd been talking to. We talked and laughed for a while, and I'd almost forgotten about that one strange moment when he did something weird again. Alan stared off into the distance for a moment, as if he was listening to or waiting for something. I lost my train of thought and trailed off. He slapped himself, not too hard, but still. What? And muttered to himself, "Knock it off." That old paranoia started to kick in, and I got up off the bed, unsure of what to do. Sensing my apprehensions, Alan shook his head and grinned. "It's okay, love. Come here. Come back to bed." Cautiously, I wandered back over to the bed, and he accepted me with outstretched arms. He held me against his chest to be close to someone again. It felt nice. Sleep was close, too. I was nearly out when Alan did it again. He knocked his head into the headboard behind him, a little harder than he'd struck himself earlier, but not so hard he'd hurt himself. Like how sometimes I catch myself thinking about putting my hand down the garbage disposal, if only for a split second. "Quit it, seriously," he grumbled, a little sterner than before. My mind raced as I puzzled over how I should respond, or if I should respond at all. Finally, I eased my feet onto the floor, kissed him on the forehead, and told him I needed the restroom. I padded out of the bedroom and down the hallway into the bathroom. I needed some time to organize my thoughts, to discern my next move. I could no longer ignore my rising fear. I realized that, regardless of however sweet he had been all night, I no longer felt safe. I was in a virtual stranger's house. Nobody even knew where I was, and I didn't feel safe. He seemed like he was battling with something internal. And while I completely understand that doesn't inherently make someone dangerous, in fact, if he was hearing voices or something like that, he'd actually be more likely to be victimized himself than to hurt me. I splashed some cold water on my face, tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that I was safe. All of that went out the window when just seconds later, I heard a loud noise from the bedroom, something crashing into the wall with a loud thud. "If you don't cut it out, I'm gonna have to call the police." Then the shuffling sounds of a physical struggle, but Alan was the only one in the room, and I didn't want to be in that room anymore. I slipped out of the bathroom, moved quickly on tiptoes into the living room, then held my breath as I cracked the front door open. I exploded into the night in my bare feet. My shoes, left behind, were the farthest thing from my mind. I risked a look over my shoulder just as the lights of the front room flickered on. Alan bounded out the front door, exasperated. "Where are you?" he bellowed, feet coming down hard along the driveway. "Where are you, bitch?" He looked for a few minutes, but he never found me. I was lying beneath his neighbor's car, frozen in abject terror. Once I was convinced he'd given up on his search, I ran down the street, called a cab, and never looked back. He tried to contact me again, tried to put on that sweet facade again, but I wasn't having any of it. The vitriol in his voice as he shouted after me was so intense, so primal, that I knew how he really felt about me. I could never feel safe with him again. After escaping that night, I felt lucky. I replayed the story to my girlfriends over numerous drinks and anxious laughter the following weekend, boasting that I dodged a bullet with Alan, that he was not right in the head, that I'd lost a good pair of heels but saved myself a lot of grief. Years passed, and I didn't think of that night any further. That is, until his best friend, another guy from our high school, was tried for murdering one of his dates. The prosecution alleged that he chucked her off the roof of his parents' mansion, but he insisted she was a lunatic. She was drunk and had been acting erratic all night, so crazy and so hysterical that she jumped herself. He tried to help her, tried to stop her, but she was dangerous, aggressive. To prove his point, he handed over an audio recording of the hour leading up to her death. "You never know what you might get accused of these days," he claimed. "Best to cover your bases, right?" He was acquitted, got off on all charges, got away with no consequences, same as he and Alan always had in high school. To his credit, it did sound like she was behaving oddly, even aggressively. As he claimed, "I've heard the recording. I've listened to it 100 times over. I've heard the soft sounds of blows falling. I've heard him tell her, a little too clearly if you ask me, to knock it off, cut it out. He even tells her that if she doesn't stop, he'll have to call the police." Right before she jumped. But I know the truth. I know the fucking truth. I know that he did it, but I can't prove it. And I know that I was lucky to have escaped that night. I didn't just dodge a bullet. I escaped my own murder. Allegedly, of course. I didn't see it myself, but it's clear to me now that Alan was recording our date that night. And if I hadn't run out of there myself, I would have left his house in a body bag. Alan wasn't hearing any voices, wasn't trying to silence intrusive thoughts, wasn't talking to himself at all. He wasn't even talking to me. He was performing for the jury of my future murder trial. Whatever you do, don't read this. Just delete your dating apps ASAP. The first time I saw those words, my day started off like any other. I went to work at my monotonously, mind-numbingly boring desk job, clacked on the keyboard for 8 hours, had the same bland ham and cheese sandwich for lunch. As I sat in the break room, halfway through my sandwich, I opened the dating app I downloaded only recently. I was a fairly good-looking guy, so I'd gotten plenty of matches and been on countless dates, but none of the women were really what I was searching for. Somewhere between shoving the last piece of my sandwich into my mouth and deciding whether or not to delete the app, my phone pinged with a match, Guinevere Motley. Curiosity got the best of me as I clicked on the notification and read her message. "Whatever you do, don't read this." That was a strange way to get my attention. Usually they send a pickup line or something funny. Tapping on her picture, I noticed that there was only one, but geez, she was stunning. Long brunette curls cascaded over her shoulders and toppled down her back, and thick, dark lashes, adorned with seafoam green irises. My eyes trailed down the picture as I took in mile-long legs and tasteful curves. The little white sundress she was wearing looked like it was made just for her. Heck, This woman was a bombshell. When I went back to the message though, I realized that it had been deleted. Looking up at the clock, I noticed that I had about 5 minutes till my lunch break was over. With one more glance at her profile, I shrugged and deleted the app. She was probably a bot or a scammer anyway. That night, I did the usual. Ran to the gym and worked out for about an hour and a half. Picked up some tacos from my favorite food truck and sat down to watch an episode of Black Mirror. Everything was normal. That was until about a couple months later. By that time, I'd forgotten all about Guinevere's cryptic message. Let me start off by saying that my morning did play out as it normally would have. I slept in until about 10 a.m., then I spent the next hour out in the front yard mowing the lawn. It was a particularly hot day. My plain white t-shirt soaked through with sweat. Tugging it off, I set it on the front porch before edging the lawn. By the time I got it done, my hair was drenched and my shoulders were burnt red. When everything was put back in my shed though, I couldn't help but feel a bit accomplished. Besides Mr. Kelman's house next door, I had one of the nicest yards on the block. I noticed the door of my mailbox hanging open, and I trudged over there to check the mail before shutting it closed. On the way up my driveway, I flicked through the envelopes with uninterested fingers. Water bill, phone bill, bank statement, junk mail, advertisement, Arby's coupons, and then I paused. My fingers quickly came to a standstill when they landed on a plain, black envelope. Instantly, my interest was piqued. Turning it over, I saw that it was sealed with crimson-colored wax. Now I was really invested. Who even sends letters like this anymore? I slid my thumb under the seal, ripped open the envelope without a second thought, and tugged out the note inside. Thick, dark ink was scrawled across it, and I took no time in reading it. Let me guess. Despite my warning, you've decided to read this. I told you not to, but now it's too late. By the time you've made it to this point, there's little chance of turning back. The second your eyes landed on these words, you just couldn't help yourself. I guess I shouldn't blame you. I couldn't stop myself either. The curiosity was simply too much to handle. So let me at least tell you what you're in for. I'm going to warn you right now. It's not going to be pleasant, but you did this to yourself. Remember that. Pausing for a moment, confusion bubbled from within me at the words. What warning? Flipping the paper over, I didn't see any writing on the other side. That was until I glanced at the back of the envelope. I could have sworn that this writing wasn't here before. Surely I would have noticed it. In huge red letters, the words, "Whatever you do, don't read this," stared back at me. What kind of sick joke was this? With a quick glance around my neighborhood, I wondered if anyone had even seen who delivered the letter. My interest only grew when I realized that there was no return address. Heck, my name or address wasn't written on the envelope either. Perhaps this was meant for someone else? Surely, if it was for me, they would have addressed it to me. Brushing it off, I ripped it to shreds and tossed it in the garbage. Right about that time, I noticed Miss Brookfield on her front porch looking over. A smile stretched across her face as she raised her hand to wave at me. Offering a wave of my own, I suddenly got an idea. She was a nosy old bat, and she always seemed to sit out on her porch on mowing days. But in this instance, it might prove to be helpful. Maybe she had seen who delivered the strange letter. Sauntering across the street, I walked up the steps to her front porch and offered her a smile. "Hey, Miss Brookfield, how you doing?" Shiver raced over me as I watched her pale, blue eyes slide up and down my shirtless chest before speaking, a mischievous smile tugging at her lips. "A lot better since you're here." A vulgar little chuckle escaped her brightly painted lips as she finally met my eyes. "I might be past my prime, but I've got the most beautiful little granddaughter that might—" "Miss Brookfield," I started, cutting her off. "I apologize for interrupting, but the reason I really came over here is because I received a strange letter in my mailbox." One silver brow raised as she waited for me to continue. "I guess I was wondering if you'd seen anyone deliver it." "You mean the mailman?" she fired back, sarcasm melting into her words as she fanned herself. "No, not the mailman." I laughed a little awkwardly before saying, "I think this letter was hand-delivered." With a shake of her head, she stood and walked over to her front porch. Pulling open the screen door, she threw me one more glance. "I see almost everything that goes on in this neighborhood, and I can assure you that the only person I noticed stopping at your mailbox was the mailman." "Okay," I started. "Thank you, Slamming her screen door shut, she left me before I could even finish my sentence. I guess since the show was over, she didn't want anything else to do with me. I shuffled a bit in place, then shoved my hands into my pockets before scampering across the street and back onto my property. Nasty old woman wasn't helpful at all. With a quiet scoff, I threw open my own front door and strolled inside, making a mental note to keep my shirt on next time I mowed my yard. Sunday was uneventful, and the strange letter was honestly the last thing on my mind. I had a spreadsheet I needed to get done for work, and I had to present it at 8 a.m. the next morning. My day flew by almost as fast as my fingers flew across my keyboard. If this presentation went well, I was sure it would end in a promotion and a raise. Monday morning, I woke up and was running a bit late. Luckily, I pressed and starched everything the night before, rolling up the sleeves of my cusp, white button down. I quickly threw on a tie, stepped into a pair of black slacks, and slid into some shiny black loafers. With a glance in the mirror, I carted a hand through my still damp hair before deciding to add a bit of gel, hoping it would stay in place long enough to survive the meeting. Everything that could have gone wrong that morning did. Throwing my car in reverse, I peeled out of my neighborhood and onto the freeway. Two people pulled out in front of me. I had to swerve when a chair came toppling out of an overly packed pickup truck, and then to top it all off, I managed to get stuck in a traffic jam that was moving at a snail's pace. The time was ticking by, and as each minute passed, I was getting more irritated. My boss wasn't a man who would accept any kind of silly excuse. So in 15 more minutes, I was good as dead. Trying to calm myself down, I switched through the radio stations, but strangely, all of them were static filled, except for one. My fingers froze on the knob as a strange feeling of dread washed over me, the voice coming through the radio, cutting through all the noise outside. Ryan, the voice, a sort of breathy whine, crackled over the sound system in my car as it whispered, "You read it, didn't you?" A mixture of confusion and indescribable fear began to blossom deep within me as I stared at the screen. Looking at the radio station, my eyes widened as I saw the station number, 66.6, glared back at me. What the actual... Ryan. Repeating my name again. The voice wavered a bit before a hissing sound filled the car. It was so ear-splittingly loud that I clenched my eyes shut and attempted to block out the noise with my hands. When I finally pulled them away from my ears, the hissing sound dropped to a low buzz, and something warm dripped from my ear. Running a finger over it, I quietly panicked when red stained the pad of my fingertip. With shaky hands, I reached into my glove compartment for a napkin and cleaned myself up as best as I could. By the time I glanced up at the clock, traffic was still at a standstill, and I half expected the time to slap me in the face when I looked over at it. Instead, it still read 7:45. Closing my eyes, I blinked a couple times before peering at the numbers again. What the heck was this? A minute later, the traffic cleared up, and I was moving again. I twisted the knob on the radio, trying to change the channel to something different, the incessant sound of the buzzing noise driving me insane. But that's when I heard it again. That voice. "Ryan, how do you know my name?" I shouted. I must have looked absolutely ridiculous, but I didn't care. "How?" I repeated angrily. "Ryan, I told you not to do it. It's too late now. You've read it." Ice-cold terror ran through my veins as I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Listen to me," it whispered, the voice on the radio a strange-sounding warble over the fuzzy static that was beginning to rise. "I want you to swerve out into traffic." "What? No," I shouted, my anger simmering dangerously close to outrage. Without so much as a second thought, though, I watched in horror as my foot pressed down on the accelerator and my hands twisted the steering wheel. Within a matter of seconds, the sickening crunch of metal rang through my ears as I crashed into another car. The impact knocked me out cold. When I awoke in the hospital sometime during the night, I learned that it was because of the airbag. The concussion I gained because of that made me feel like my thoughts were swimming through a thick blanket of fog, but that soon cleared up within a few days. What didn't clear was the guilt that hung over me like a cloud. The people in that car weren't severely injured, but I did find out that it was a mother and a young child. Both of our cars were totaled, but despite everything, it was written off as an accident. It was determined that I'd passed out before my car swerved into the other lane, but I could have sworn I was conscious. The voice told me to swerve. I was sure of it. That's what made me feel so horrible about the whole situation. I would have taken full responsibility. Guilt was a heck of a feeling, and and I hated every second of it. I should have spoken up. I should have taken accountability. I should have fought just a little harder to block out the voice. When I finally made it back to work at the end of the week though, I was pleasantly surprised to find that my boss had looked over the spreadsheet that I'd emailed and decided that despite me not being able to present it like I'd intended, he was very impressed. In fact, he wanted to see me in his office at 2 that afternoon to discuss it. Deciding to go ahead and take my lunch, I headed to the break room and pulled out my usual sandwich. For some reason, I was only able to eat about half of it though, before I started feeling kinda sick. My eyes darted around the room for a trash can before I finally ran over to the sink. Gripping the edge of it, I wasted no time in emptying everything in my stomach into the sink. The horrible burning sensation in my throat made tears well up in my eyes as I tried to get myself under control. And that's when I heard it. The little radio sitting on the counter flipped between about a dozen stations before it stopped on one. "Ryan," it whispered. "No, please no." I sputtered out through gritted teeth. "I want you to put your hand inside the garbage disposal." A small sob broke from my lips as I watched my hand once again betray me. Slowly, it dipped towards the sink, closer and closer, until, "Oh hey Ryan, I didn't know you'd come back yet." The sound of one of my coworkers successfully broke the trance, and once again, my hand was mine. "Steph, could you turn off the radio?" My voice was shaky and uneven as I fought the urge to vomit again. "What do you mean?" she asked. She grabbed something from the fridge. "It is turned off." A nervous laugh bubbled up from my throat as I cleaned myself up and turned to face her, my hand reaching up to scratch the back of my neck awkwardly. "Right, yeah, sorry," I managed to stutter out. A sympathetic smile tugged at her lips as she unwrapped her own lunch. "Are you okay?" "No," I wanted to scream. I'm so freaking far from okay that I'm hearing voices. But instead, my hand came to fidget with the sleeves of my button down before I rolled them up and said, "Ah yes, I'm still a little out of it." I locked eyes with her and tried to play it off, just a little brain fog still. With a mouthful of salad, she simply nodded in understanding as she chewed. Based on her expression, I'm not sure if I convinced her, but that was the last thing on my mind. Throwing up a hand, I waved to her as I strolled out of the break room and back over to my cubicle. As I took a seat in my chair, my leg bounced anxiously. I wish that envelope hadn't ever shown up in my mailbox. I wish whatever this was would quit happening. I wish I'd never even read any of that letter. Another much more worried part of me wishes I'd have at least read it all the way through. Maybe it might have provided an explanation about why I'm experiencing all this and how to make it stop. There's no way I could constantly live my life on edge, worrying about my own body betraying me at any given moment. A glimpse at my clock didn't make me feel any better. The meeting with my boss was in 10 minutes. Whatever confidence I'd worn that morning had now melted into a thick sludge in the bottom of my stomach. With clammy hands, I pushed myself up from my chair and made my way across the room. The second I stepped in, he smiled up at me and pointed towards one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Take a seat, Ryan." Nodding, I sat down in one of the leather chairs and tried not to fidget. "Now," he began, his voice gruff and gravelly, "let me pull up those spreadsheets real quick so we can go over them. I was really impressed with your work, and I think..." The shrill scream of his office phone interrupted the conversation, and he was quick to pick it up, holding one of his calloused hands up in a silent apology. Yes, Farah." He paused before peering up at me. "Yes, he's in here. Would you like me to give him the phone?" Pulling the phone away from his ear, he offered it to me before going back to looking at his computer. The second I held it up to my ear, all of the blood drained out of my face when I heard the voice on the other end of the line. "Ryan," it rasped. "Do you see that pen in front of you?" My voice wavered, and my breaths were uneven as I replied, "No." The slim silver pen gleamed up at me from the desk, but I refused to play into this game any further. "You're lying to me," the voice hissed. A glance at the phone screen made me feel like I was losing my mind. The phone number read 666. Whatever this thing was, it impersonated Farah and was able to contact me through a number of ways. "I want you to grab that pen and stab it through the palm of his hand." I broke out in a cold sweat as my other hand drifted towards the pen, my boss still typing away. "No," I repeated, a little more firmly this time. "There has to be a way," I sputtered out before settling on, "What did the rest of the letter say?" The silence on the other side of the receiver was loud as I waited for a reply, my hand halting for a moment. "If you want this to stop, "There's one simple thing I need you to do," the voice said, its tone strangely excited. "Anything," I begged, desperate to be free of the curse. "Pass it on." The next couple of seconds, I listened to this thing tell me the most vile, sinister things I have ever heard in my life. I can't even repeat it, but please know that by the time you finished reading this, it's really too late. You're already interested. You won't be able to help yourself. All I can say is that I warned you. Whatever you do, don't read this alone. Warning. The next stories may just make you think twice about moving to a small town. I thought I found the best barber in town. Turns out I stumbled into a nightmare I couldn't escape. Mr. Fiskel has cut my hair since I moved to the city about 3 years ago. He's an older guy, maybe 50s or 60s, and he possesses that look and drawl that makes me think he's from up north somewhere. He could be from New York, Maine, or even the Great Lakes area, but I never asked him where. He's not a big guy, maybe a $1.20 in the rain, and he cuts my hair just the way I like it. High and tight on the sides, leaves them on the top so whoever I'm sleeping with has a potential to play with and neaten up my sideburns. I can't grow a real beard, or he'd probably trim that for me too. The best part is, he does all of it for free. Hard to believe, I know, but it seems there was a cost after all. Our relationship started easily enough. I had an interview with the city, maintenance and custodial, and I wanted to look sharp and make a good impression. Everything other than that paid nothing or barely nothing, and I really wanted to lock this job down. I had a nice set of interview clothes, some comfortable business shoes, and a winning smile, and I needed a sharp haircut to seal the deal. That is where the problem lies. My hair grows abnormally fast. It always has, and when I was a kid, my dad used to moan the fact. He made jokes about going to the barber school or buying stock in master cuts, but he always understood that when it was time for a cut, it was time for a cut. If you let it go longer than 2 weeks without a cut, it just turns into a shapeless mass. By the end of week 3, I looked like a sheepdog, and Dad would look over his paper and sigh before saying he would take me to the barber. Fiskel's hair and beards was about a block from my house, and when I stuck my head in to see their prices, Mr. Fiskel looked up and smiled at me over the pile of hair he was sweeping up. Then, suddenly, took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again, I asked if everything was okay. "Just fine, young man. Say, you look like a man in need of a haircut. Am I right?" I told him he sure was, and he invited me in and told me to have a seat. He had about 1,000,000 questions on that first visit. No, I didn't usually let it get this long. I liked it this way, but a little long on the top. No, I didn't use any special shampoo, just dandruff shampoo from the Dollar General. No, I wasn't really prone to dry scalp, but a fella can never be too careful. On and on and on until finally it was done. He had cut it just right. The perfect length, the perfect fade, everything. I asked him what I owed him, and he told me it was free. "Come on," I said. "You gotta charge me something." "I let my customers pay what they can afford," he said. "So whatever you can afford is fine with me. Think of it as a tip." I was okay with that and walked out with a free haircut while Mr. Fiskel waved me out with a $10 tip. I left with a spring in my step. I felt like a new man, and I was ready for that job interview. I went home, got a shower, and when I looked in the mirror, I knew I had this. The next time I went to see Mr. Fiskel, I left him a $20 tip and told him it was all thanks to him that I had gotten my awesome new job. For the next couple of years, I always went to Mr. Fiskel when I needed a cut. If I had a date coming up, I went to Fiskel's. Promotion interview at work, Fiskel's. I told friends about his shop. I went there just to get a touch up and talk with the old fella. In no time at all, Mr. Fiskel and I were friends. He liked the same sports team I did, watched a lot of the same movies and TV shows I did, and even liked a lot of the same classic rock that I did. It was great. And I always looked forward to my bi-monthly haircut. Then, about 2 months ago, it all changed. I had come in to get my bi-monthly cut, telling Mr. Fiskel about the previous week as he cut and styled my hair. He was always meticulous, getting everything just right as he cut and trimmed. And when he turned me around to look into the mirror, it was the same way I had gotten it for the last 3 years. I thanked him, handed him $10, and told him I'd see him soon. Of course, Mr. Fiscal said, sweeping up the hair. Come back anytime. I was leaving, almost a block up the street, when I realized I didn't have my sunglasses. They were my brand new Oakleys, and they had cost quite a bit of cash. I remembered having them when I came in, taking them off my head and setting them down at the station Mr. Fiscal used. No problem, I thought. I'll just go back and get them. I stepped in, saying I'd forgotten my sunglasses and was just going to grab them. And that's when I saw him. Mr. Fiscal was looking up guiltily, his eyes panicked. He was down on all fours, eating the hair that he had swept up off the ground like he was a cow in the field. When he turned, I could see pieces of hair sticking to his lips. He stood up, wiping himself off, brushing at his mouth as he tried to explain. I know how this looks, and I'll admit that yes, I was eating your hair, but you have to understand, your hair is what I look forward to. I don't eat just anyone's hair. Well, I used to. Now, I can't wait to see you come in so I can eat something good. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, he shouted, getting up as he stalked towards me. He seemed to realize that saying that made him sound crazy, so he switched gears. Haven't I always done good work for you? There's nowhere in this town that you would get a haircut for less than $25. I cut your hair for tips. I've cut your hair for the dollars in your pocket. I've been good to you, and you've been a good customer. Let's just pretend this never happened, okay? Let's just go back to, but I didn't hear the rest. I snatched up my sunglasses and was out the door before he could say another word. I spent a while thinking about that, and the more I processed it, the worse it seemed to get. It began to haunt my dreams, seeing him bent over and eating the hair straight off the floor, looking back at me and grinning with my hair in his teeth. And I would wake up in a cold sweat. I know, it's not a particularly scary thing, but it freaked the hell out of me. I don't really like it when people put hair in their mouth. I had a girl in elementary school who used to chew her pigtails, and it bred a lifetime phobia in me. Just the thought of wet hair in someone's mouth makes me want to puke, and I can't even touch someone's hair without cringing if they have a wig. A weird collection of phobias, but they're mine. It only took a couple weeks before I started seeing new growth. My hair just grows too fast, and after 3 weeks, my boss commented that I was looking shabby. He handed me a 20 out of his own wallet and told me to get a trim over lunch. I took it and started looking for somewhere to get a trim. The city had quite a few shops, but it seemed like whenever I was in one, I caught someone looking at me out of the corner of my eye. It was never anything I could prove, just a feeling. And when I looked up, I could almost catch a glimpse of Mr. Fiscal. He was gone when I looked, but it made me extremely paranoid. I became aware of more than a glimpse as the weeks went on. When I rode the bus to work, I caught the familiar deep inhale of someone smelling my hair. When I was standing in a lunch line, I felt my hair move as someone inhaled. When I was at Walmart buying groceries, someone actually touched my hair, but they were gone when I turned around. It led me to become something of a recluse, and I only left the house to go to work. Over time, my hair grew out, and I decided I would have to get another cut. I went to bed, setting my alarm so I could get up early enough to get to the master cuts down on Bonnie. It was Saturday. I had the day off, and I had chores to do before I got to the business of relaxing. As I slipped off to sleep, I fell into a familiar dream, a dream that had plagued me for weeks. I was sitting in the barber chair at Mr. Fiscal's, the cape falling around me like a spider web, and the old man asking me if it was too tight. I didn't say anything. I was too scared to speak. And as the scissors began to clip, I trembled in fear. I didn't dare look back at the old man. I just knew his real face would be replaced by a monstrous visage, and I would wake up panting and looking around for nothing at all. When the alarm went off, I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face and start the shower. My bare shoulder itched, and when I went to wipe it off, I noticed there was hair clinging to my sweaty hands. Not a lot, just leavings, like the leavings you find after a haircut. I ran to the bathroom and found that my hair was cut just the way I liked it. The sides were high and tight, the top was manageable but still thick, and my bangs were perfect. Everything was just as it usually was. I felt a cold chill run through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I called the landlord, had the locks changed, and reported to the police that someone had broken into my house and cut my hair. The police didn't really take it seriously. They made jokes about a midnight barber and asked if I'd left a tip under my pillow. I told them about Mr. Fiskel, but when I gave them the address, they just shook their heads and walked away. They thought I was joking with them. They didn't believe a word of what I've told them. And as I ran the shower, I remember sitting under the water for a very long time and just letting it run over me. The bits of hair flowing down the drain felt like a betrayal. 2 weeks later, I woke up with another fresh haircut. I called the police, but they rolled their eyes and told me to calm down. I told them it was hard for me to calm down when someone was breaking into my house and cutting my hair. I demanded they go check on Mr. Fiskel, and I told them right where his shop was. But they looked less amused this time at the suggestion. I asked if they had been to talk to him yet and told them he hadn't been there for 3 years. But they just told me that it hadn't been funny the first time and that it wasn't funny now. Why would it be funny? I asked, having to stop myself from grabbing one of them. Because Fiskel's has never been open. It was a prop for the city's revitalization project, like Cooley Flowers across the street from it or Green Butcher beside it. It's a set dressing. It's never open. Mr. Fiskel was a guy who owned a barbershop in the 20s. He's dead. There is no Fiskel who cuts hair. They left, and that left me very rattled. Mr. Fiskel isn't a ghost. I know that. I have friends who go to him. I have felt him touch me. He's flesh and blood, just like I am. I'm sure of it. The fact that he eats hair is incidental. The man is real, but if he isn't Mr. Fiskel, then who is he? How does he keep breaking into my house? I have a window in my room, but it's barred with a piece of broom handle and I live on the 3rd floor. I changed the locks again. I wedged a chair under my door. And when I finally made myself calm down enough to sleep, I hoped it would end. I woke up completely bald. Not buzzed, not at a 0 guard, but bald. Like someone shaved my head in my sleep and took the hair. They got my eyebrows too, my 5 o'clock shadow, and my thick sideburns. I was as smooth and hairless as a newborn baby. I didn't know what to do. I can't call the cops. They wouldn't believe me. I can't call the landlord. He's replaced the locks twice now and is getting angry about it. I can't afford to move. I can't leave my job. I'm stuck. What I did find, however, was a message left on my nightstand. I'm sure the cops will say that I wrote it, but I know I didn't. There's hair on it, and it's written in a heavy hand like a kid's scribblings. It's done on the back of an ad for Fiskel's hair and beards, and the implication was pretty obvious. Come see me when it grows back. If you don't, it makes no difference. I know where to find you. Serving the wrong customer at the Lone Star Diner can get you killed, or worse. There's a reason we're paid so well, and it has to do with the man who keeps returning. I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno. Diner name has of course been changed for obvious reasons. More on that later. Why do I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno? Well, because, kind stranger, my life plans didn't work out. Generally, if you're caught working at a diner past college, specifically one in the middle of nowhere, it might mean that things aren't going so hot. But still, why this diner? Why Lone Star specifically? I'm aware you probably aren't asking these questions, but I nonetheless believe they deserve a response. Of all the diners in the world, what makes Lone Star so special is the pay. The pay is freaking great. There are maybe 10 other diners within a 30-minute drive from where I live. Most of them average out to a little over minimum wage. Meanwhile, Lone Star is whipping up a mean $50 an hour, and that hourly rate is due to one single solitary reason, no matter what anyone tells you: because of him. My first day on the job was fine, more or less. I worked customer service before, so I felt like I could run with the strange surprises that came unique to diners. I was able to adapt to the inconsistency of the rules pretty quickly. Unwritten rules, like some areas in the restaurant, need to be spotless at all time. Others, boss lady couldn't give less of a shit about. Serve customers quickly, but not too quickly, asshole. Customers here don't actually like it when you show up too fast. Give them some time to feel the floor under their boots, to miserably stare ahead and mourn what could have been. You know, diner stuff. They're here because they want to be alone. Pardon the contradiction. Of course, vaguely defined, whispered only by ghost rules extend to the cooks as well. If you were somehow secretly celebrity chef Marco Pierre White in the flesh, your mandate was to keep your damn prowess to yourself. Your job is to make the classics as decently as possible, not bad, but not amazing. Just poor enough to be really good. That's what the customers are here for. As the weeks unfolded, I rose, or I suppose crouched to the occasion quite well. You want intentional, pinpoint precision, mediocrity? You've come to the right person. Most of the patrons just wanted coffee and brunch, brought to them at medium speed, with a semi-predictable cadence of waiter or waitress check-ins afterwards. Done, and done. Not one for subtlety. One day I finally decided to ask my boss the question in the middle of a shift. I didn't want to ruin a good thing by doubting it. But screw me if I wasn't a little curious. Not a full look at the gift horse mouth, more of a skeptical side eye. Why $50 an hour? She didn't even look up from her task at the register, methodically counting out bills. Set it on your first day. You gotta be good at following the rules. And when it's an important rule, you'd better be damn well perfect. High expectations here. I made a face. Right, high expectations. You think I'm joking? No, ma'am. Why did I even speak up? I just think you're running a really cool operation here. Cooler than you might realize. It's still work, but the whole thing seems fair? Christ, my waffling skills were abysmal. Add that to the list of intentional mediocrity. Booyah. She looked up from her duties and shot me a stern look. I don't run this ship, and following the rules here means that you take care of yourself. I'm sorry? I'm your employer, sure, and I'll pay you well to be here, sure, but you should be aware there's plenty more going on here than just you and this diner. She glanced down at her watch, then sighed. I usually save this speech for the end of the month, but you already caught me halfway through it. So, the call's notes. If you don't think you have it in you to follow instructions clearly, without protest, without asking too many questions, then you should leave. Quit. No harm, no foul. A week's worth of pay on the house. The conversation sputtered shortly after that. I tried to find an opening to ask more about what she meant, but she was closed off to the topic moving forward. You know what? That was fine. She wanted me to put my head down and just do the work. I could do that, and work I did. And things were good. Mundane small talk with the customers was fun. My coworkers were friendly, and I was getting paid well. I found a place to park the failures of my life, a place to build from. It must have been a Saturday, I think, when I first noticed him. An occupied seat in the far corner of the diner. No idea how long he'd been sitting there and waiting, though he certainly looked patient. I had the strange inkling that he'd been left hanging for quite some time, though I couldn't actually remember seeing him enter. Brown corduroy shirt, short hair, mid-50s, it seemed. A reasonably calm smile, normal looking dude. Started making my way out from the back and headed towards him. Immediately, I felt a tight grip on my arm. It was Melanie, my boss, with a forceful clutch enough to make me drop my notepad. Her fingers tightened around my forearm, sharply pinching my skin. Important rules, she said. What? You remember our chat about the rules? Well, this is the most important one. Okay? That man over there, in the corner. She motioned to the man who had caught my attention, sitting upright, hands softly clasped together, coy smile across his face. You don't go up to him. You don't say a word to him. But he's a customer? Her hold intensified. She was hurting me, almost as if she was taking out some sort of unseen anger on me. I'd like to ask you right now to be smart enough to not ask questions and just follow instructions. You don't go to his table. You don't talk to him. You can look at him. You can shout across the room at him if you'd like, though I can't imagine why you'd ever need to do that. But you do not approach him. You do not take his order. Or a sharp exhale through the nose, a shake of the head, and a glare from my manager. It's different every time, but it ain't pretty. I watched him from the short distance I'd been afforded. It was hard not to. She did too. Unlike the other customers here, I didn't get a sense that he was here to be alone, to reminisce, or to take part in the comfort ritual of a lackluster Eggs Benedict over rye. Instead, I had the sense that he was just curious, mild-mannered, content, but curious. My shift ended not too long after, so I didn't actually get a chance to watch him leave. Regardless, the experience of seeing him and learning about the rule he was connected to left a bizarre, dampening feeling on my mood. I liked my job. I liked coming home and unwinding. I didn't mind being in the middle of nowhere. Felt nice to look up at the empty sky filled with stars, to see them shimmer and shine, and even occasionally shoot across. I made a wish that things in my life would stay simple. I started to get a sense of his cadence. He'd usually show up once a month. The rare times I got to see him, I tried to squeak in the odd question of my boss. Questions like, who is he? Where does he come from? And has anyone spoken with him? All mechanically met with, I don't know. And if you're scared, you're welcome to quit. Then, as fate would have it, one day, boss lady fell incredibly ill. My coworkers and I had to convince her to go home midway through her shift, her sickness falling uncomfortably within the usual 1 to 3 day window at the end of the month when our customer would typically appear. And of course, there he was, right after she went home. To my benefit, the other waiters and waitresses working the rounds were well aware of his presence and knew exactly what to do whenever he arrived. All of them knew to steer clear of him. Nevertheless, driven by the foundational curiosity that I couldn't shake, I used this opportunity to go for it. I shouted a single thing across the floor, knowing Melanie wasn't there to chide me. "Hello, sir. What brings you in?" I asked him. He turned his head from his fixed position in his seat and put a hand to his ear. "Clever." I said, "What brings you here?" I called out again, a few notches louder this time, garnering some odd looks from our Thursday patrons. To my surprise, he spoke back. I'm not sure why I was expecting his voice to carry the tone of some twisted, demented demon. Maybe the fear Melanie had instilled in me? The man sounded exactly how he looked. "I'm sorry, my dear," he said. "I'm afraid I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you come over here and ask me again?" "Nope." I was good. "And I don't mean to be rude about the service," he continued, "but it feels as if no one has taken my order for quite some time now." I let the exchange end there, diverting my attention back to the other guests. As always, he'd eventually disappear without fanfare, without the clatter of the entrance bell or any sight or sound of his steps across the diner floor. Our backroom conversations about him remaining dreadfully short while he was just there. He's here, and he's gone. And the odd, when we really needed to say it, I feel really weird about this. It took me a while to understand where my brazenness to address this strange middle-aged man came from. In truth, I was just afraid. His presence and all of the questions tied to his being at our diner were disrupting this otherwise great arrangement that I felt I had. It seemed right, in the moment, to stand at the very edge of my bravery and say something to him. Of course, now that he was gone, I just felt worse. The next week, I was invited to something pretty interesting at work. I generally have a good amount of visibility into what Melanie, boss lady, does on a daily basis. The only element that remained elusive was her bi-weekly check-in with a particularly sharp-dressed, agent-looking fella. There was a pretty consistent presence of state troopers, agents, and similarly uniformed men and women dropping into the diner, though I seldom paid it mind beyond simply noticing it. Midway through wiping down the tables, only an hour or so into my shift, Mel swung by and said, "Hey, want you in the meeting with the big boss, if you have a few." "The big boss? Sure, yeah. Coming in. Just, if you don't mind me asking, who is..." She let her eyes speak her unwritten rules to me. Questions equals generally bad. "Thank you for the reminder, ma'am." We maneuvered to the back room and sat at a table. Across from us, already seated, was a man in a sharply tailored suit with a subtle earpiece in, the aforementioned agent. The table was littered with a small, messy stack of notes and papers and documents. He made it a point to size me up, staring me down uninterrupted, like a deer in headlights. No concern at all about how awkward he was making it for me. Then he turned to Melanie. "How long she been here?" he asked her with his gruff western drawl. 6 months, she said. "You trust her?" "I trust her. Yes." He let his eyebrows say, "If you say so," then went on with it. "All right, so apparently you had a visit from the wandering man last week. You," he said, monitoring to Melody, "were out. But you," attention now shifted to me, "weren't. Give me the lowdown." "The wandering man?" The agent caught the confusion in my eyes. "Jesus, you've told this girl nothing, haven't you?" he said to Melanie. "Sir, I know it sounds weird," she said, "but I personally feel as if the man is almost, I don't know, drawn to curiosity. Like maybe the less I say to those not already in the know, the bet." "Wandering man," the agent cut her off. is our nickname for the fella that sits in the corner of your fine little establishment. Or should I say, the state's fine little establishment. I'm sorry? I asked. That's correct. The state's. Congratulations, ma'am. You're part of a government operation. The Wandering Man, not just a cutesy little nickname, but our legal definition of this tricky little problem, is a phenomena we discovered many years ago. At the time, he just walked the desert landscape, chatting up unsuspecting strangers with bizarre questions. Everything fine, all hunky-dory, a little weird, sure, but nothing illegal. However, sometimes things would happen because of him. Bizarre things. Grisly things. I could see Melanie groaning, concerned at the picture being painted. Would this pique my curiosity? Have you guys, taken him in for... I almost wanted to cut my own stupid question, but he ran with it. Nope, not because we don't want to, but rather because it might not be safe. The cozy mental image I'd held of this diner was starting to fracture. We have reason to believe that he's a visitor, he said. I didn't attend another debrief after that. Not because I was barred, mind you. Rather, I just didn't want to know anymore. My gut no longer held curiosity. There was just a low, aching dread there now. The agents and troopers, spaced out and seated amongst the eatery, were now just a glaring reminder of what my dingy diner job really was. The government cavalry would mostly show up around the end of the month window the Wandering Man was set to arrive in. When he'd appear, they wouldn't do much more than examine him from their distant tables, subtly scribbling notes into notebooks. He'd always act the same. He would just sit there. He wouldn't give them, or us, the diner employees, much to go on. Speaking of employees, I remembered something Melanie told me after my first month working here, that the worker turnover at this diner was incredibly high. Knowing at the time what everyone got paid, it made absolutely no sense to me. Now, 5 months into the gig, alongside a completely new set of cooks, waiters, and waitresses from when I first started, I'd seen firsthand just how true her statement was. None of the leavers claimed as much, but I'm sure the underlying premise of who the diner was really for became subconsciously clear to them during their time here, and it probably didn't sit all too well with them. I stayed, but not because of the pay. I'm actually not sure why I did. We had a new cast of rookie employees now, the ones who understood the vague terms of the situation, just as Melanie, I, and all former employees did, stuck around. Those who couldn't reconcile the situation with their inherent curiosity naturally filtered out. And then there was Malcolm. It was only his first week. He was a keener, mega keener. He bulldozed through a giant list of tasks and was already asking for the next batch of work to chew through. Anything he could get ahead of, anything he could step in for, anything he could learn, he was on it. He wanted to be as helpful as humanly possible. I think the salary of the role, for a guy his young age, was just too alluring for him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to get him to pace himself. We were both giving the spiel now. By this point, we'd more or less perfected it. There are things with this diner that are strange, rules you will have to follow and not think about. Rules that are concrete, immutable, and non-negotiable, like gravity. He nodded. At that moment, I really believed he was internalizing my words. And if that doesn't work for you, and if you don't think you can take care of yourself, then you shouldn't work here, I continued. There was always a visceral feeling in my stomach whenever I saw the Wandering Man in the corner during the same week that we were onboarding new staff. I'm sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Mel and I would both work the till. If we saw anyone coming out from the back, we'd stop them with a simple grab of the arm. Malcolm stepped out, and I did just that, a rough grasp of his forearm, just like Melanie had done to me when I'd first started. He recoiled in surprise. "Remember that little chat about rules we just had?" I said. He nodded meekly, as if he was already in trouble. I pointed to the man seated at the far table in the brown corduroy shirt, staring straight ahead, with what I believed at the time, no real reason to be here. And I said, "You will not, under any conditions, serve that man. Don't go up to him. Don't talk to him. Pretend he doesn't exist." Malcolm lifted the garbage bag he was holding in his left hand. In my nervousness, I hadn't actually clocked what he was stepping out for. "Just doing garbage duty, ma'am," he said. but understood. And then he left out the front door with his usual swagger. The dumpster wasn't as close as we would have liked, so I appreciated his willingness to take on this duty so soon into his employment. I turned back to observe the wandering man. We had a crowd of agents in attendance that day, scattered about the restaurant. The man wasn't one to speak up often. Today was an interesting exception. "Officers," he said, "if you have any questions, feel free to join me at the table to ask them." The agents around the room reacted mainly with snickers. "Seriously, if you come sit with me, I'll be happy to spill it all." Truly, even more laughs, but no one bit. And yet he continued, pointedly, "I know you're curious. I know you take notes. I know you talk about me. I know you built this establishment for me. I know you." As I reconciled the fact that this was the most words I'd ever heard him string together in succession, I heard the chime of the bell. A door had opened. Malcolm was dusting his hands as he entered through the diner's side door, a door which was situated right beside the table the wandering man was seated at. It all happened so fast, and yet it played out in front of me excruciatingly slowly, as if there was a moment, a single solitary second, where I could have stepped in. The wandering man dropped any pretext of an exchange with the agents, stopping his sentence midway, adopting a completely new demeanor. He played the role of a low, miserable, tired man and said, 30 visits, terrible service every time, in a pathetic tone, just as Malcolm walked by. Malcolm instinctively plucked a notepad out from his chest pocket and turned his head to face the man. "Hey, I got you, Chief. I can have him bring up something for you. What are you?" And then Malcolm froze in place, and the wandering man's expression turned Cheshire cat wide. His neck alternated between tensing and fluttering with what seemed to be undeniable excitement. The man started to get up from the table, and then immediately, both of them were gone. Malcolm and the wanderer had vanished out of existence entirely. The insanity of the moment was interrupted by the coded language I heard blared over a megaphone. Nonsensical agent speak that has been seared into my memory forever. Alert level black. Wandering target has compromised a civilian. I repeat, civilian has been compromised. And that was that. Melanie quit in the days after. She wasn't mad at me. She told me she always knew she'd leave after the 10th disappearance. Why that specific milestone was required, I have no clue. All I could do from that point was continue to work. On my commutes home or during lunch breaks, I would look up at the stars and put out the wish that Malcolm be brought back home, back from wherever he'd been taken. The debriefs with the agents brought me no solace. The exchange with them was simple and short. Where was he taken to? He answered with, "He's gone now," with a perpetual dagger in my soul now. I only had the smallest of silver linings, if you can even call it that. A lesson. The lesson that I needed to be more watchful, even more diligent, and on days when the wandering man was visiting, the only server at the diner, no exceptions. I knew the agents weren't happy about that. None of them said it to me explicitly, but I could tell that they would learn something new about him every time he whisked someone away after a mistake was made. It was a weird Darwinian setup they had created. We were a zoo they could use to learn more about a specific animal, a specific entity, a specific visitor. No dice. They just have to watch him sit now, or wait for him to do something different. I waited for the 3-day stretch at the end of the month that he usually appears in. Things were quiet up until that point. When he finally showed up, it really wasn't what I expected. For the first time ever, I saw the wandering man walk right through the front door. In the dead of night, at the tail end of my shift, I was at the till, paralyzed, as he took step after step to close the distance. And then he was right there, standing in front of me. And I was sure, absolutely sure, that I was going to die. He smiled. "Don't worry. I have my own little set of rules I play by," he said. I didn't say a word. This was no man's land right now. "I know you've been curious about me. I've admired it from the moment you first spoke up to address me. Cautious curiosity is a great thing to see in someone, especially in such a reckless species. Please just go. I'd like to answer a question about why I'm visiting. I'm sure you'd like to know why I'm here, right?" "I'm not curious anymore. I swear I'm not." He laughed. "The answer is really painfully simple. This little game, this little charade I'm playing. It's just so unbelievably fun. Please don't kill me. Please, you truly have a wonderful planet. I will return again soon. Promise. Give me a month, maybe 2 this time. A sincere, kind smile delivered with kind eyes. I'll come back with a new game. And then he was gone. It took me a minute to realize that there was a cake box sitting on the counter beside me. Maybe it was there the whole time he was speaking to me. Maybe it materialized right after he left. I opened the box to find Malcolm's severed head, a blank expression on his face, sitting on a bed of poorly and confusingly organized flowers, almost as if there was an intention to create a floral arrangement, but no understanding of what something like that would look like. On top of the horrific display, written in almost childlike handwriting, was a note that read, "I brought him back, just like you wished." The worst thing about being trapped at a diner in the middle of nowhere is that you realize that there's really nowhere else to run to. Every single part of our planet is blanketed by stars, open by sky. Someone could drop in anytime. Beneath the town's calm facade, an ancient evil lies dormant. The boy's curiosity awakens the evil, unleashing hell upon Earth. My friend Tim and I were friends as long as I could remember. We hung out together all the time. Almost every waking moment, we'd either be playing games in the yard, riding bikes, or just exploring interesting areas in our small town. The freedom we had was unprecedented, especially for the current times. Our little town seemed untouched by the rest of the world, a fact that my parents reveled in. We heard stories about how things were in bigger cities, so we lived up the freedom we had in the safety of our small town, although we came to learn one year that not all danger comes from the expected places. One day, we decided to build a treehouse. Our backyard was a decent size and had one large but desolate tree. Someone had carved something at the base that looked like the initials that lovers would make. We thought nothing more of it. Tim and I were climbing it for the millionth time when I had my treehouse epiphany. Tim was more than ready to help me beg my dad to build our fortress of solitude. It would be a sanctuary for our boyish ways, and my dad was more than excited to have a project to do. Besides, any excuse to dodge mom's to-do list seemed like a good idea to him. So dad got to work, and I noticed that while he seemed excited to build our treehouse, he got these funny looks from time to time. Whenever I asked, he'd change his expression real quick and say something like, "I'm fine, just thinking about what I need to do next." Yet, I couldn't shake this feeling that he was lying to me. It didn't take very long for him to finish the treehouse. Oddly, he seemed to get hurt a lot in the process, which was especially weird for him. While he worked hard and diligent, he was also a careful man. Perhaps he felt pressured to make it perfect for us. Yeah, that was it. One night, I got up to use the bathroom and heard muffled talking from my parents' bedroom. Being the stereotypical nosy kid, I tiptoed to their door as close as I would dare. Some words were muffled, but this was the gist of the conversation. "Telling you, there's something weird about that tree. Honey, you're just tired. You've been working on this thing nonstop. You should have taken a break." "That's just it. I'm not tired. In fact, every time I went out there, it was like I got this weird surge of energy." "You're just excited too." "No, that's not it. I'd be dead tired from work and I'd just go there to look at the progress. When I would get near the tree, it was like something was calling me, and suddenly I'd feel energized. And don't look at me like that. I'm not crazy. I'm not saying that. Actually, I did feel something weird about that tree when I went out there to check on you." Gives me the creeps, but I can't just stop making the treehouse because I get a weird feeling. The guys are so excited about it. Maybe I'm more tired than I realized. I continued on to the kitchen as I heard my father's footsteps, not wanting for him to catch me. After getting back to bed, I went over what they said. My dad was not the kind to be superstitious or get weird vibes, but it was totally out of his character. But nevertheless, I eventually found myself falling back into a deep sleep. I awoke to a strange sound, softly stirring in my bed, slipping from my covers. I sauntered about my room and I realized the source of the noise. With a gulp, I approached my window and heard what seemed to be humming. My treehouse was within line of sight, but the sound wasn't coming from there. I looked down and gasped when I saw a group of men circling at the bottom of the tree. A fire roared in the center of kindling, and they chanted in a hushed tone. My throat closed up, and I tried to scream, but something wouldn't let me. "Get away! Help! I willed my vocal cords to say, but nothing worked. I stumbled out of my room, trying to make it to my parents. My hand touched the doorknob just as I felt something pull me to the ground. I grunted in pain and looked back to see a horrible creature leering back at me, showing rows of serrated teeth from a vertical mouth. It had no eyes, yet I knew it was staring into my very depths. My screams muted. I thrashed to get away from the horrid thing that would surely take me to my ill demise. The thing only dragged me faster, and I felt every bump of the stairs as it dragged me out of the house. The grass burned the bare skin of my back as it pulled me into the backyard. Arms of multiple men grabbed me and bound me with leather rope. They sat me up just in time to witness something that will never leave my memory. Hanging from the ropes of the tree branch were both of my parents. Hands held my head still, forcing me to look at their bloated blue faces as they swung back and forth with my treehouse as a backdrop. The creature came back into my view, and the men began chanting fervently as it opened its mouth wide and engulfed my head right before I woke in a sweat and began crying immediately. Being at the age of 10, I made the unspoken pact to never get upset at nightmares again. This, however, was an exception. Never had a dream felt so real before. It took my parents a while to calm me down, and it was almost an entire week before I stepped foot near that tree. When Tim and I eventually saw the inside of our treehouse, all my thoughts of that horrible dream went to the back burner. My dad had hung up all the decorations we had planned, and it was nothing less than awesome. I practically jumped off the ladder to hug my smiling dad as he hugged me back and smiled. His eyes darted upward to the treehouse, and I saw a glimmer of dread in them. Tim and I spent every morning in the treehouse together. One of the first things we figured out was how to communicate without my parents knowing. If I was ever confined in my room, he would sneak over to the treehouse and talk to me through a tin can phone. This might sound more dubious than it really was, but our backyard lined up with his backyard, so it's not like he was getting far from the safety of his home. He'd go to his backyard to play and slip through the fence to get to the treehouse. Whether I was in trouble or our parents thought we needed a little away time, we had a system to work around, and it was a good thing we did, because 3 months later, I got the flu. Ted and I spent more time than ever talking through a tin can phone, and we even rigged up a clothesline with a small bucket so we could share video games, comics, and anything else you could think of. My mom would kill me if she knew we were doing it. She was really concerned that I would get him sick. We of course didn't care, because I needed new things to do being stuck in my room. One night, I was getting ready for bed when I heard sound coming from the tin can. I dismissed it at first, since it would pick up things like squirrels or the wind if there was a drafty day, but it persisted, and I brought the tin can to my ear. "Hey, Tim?" There was an eerie silence on the other end, but I swear I could hear movement. So I tugged on the clothesline, hoping to rattle the bucket to get his attention. I held the line for a moment until I felt a familiar tug back. I picked up the tin can and said, "Hey, what are you doing in there?" "Sorry," I heard Tim whisper. "I was trying to be quiet so your parents didn't hear me. I have something for you." I watched as the bucket slowly came into my view and held up my hands to grab it. Strangely, I noticed that there was no light coming from the treehouse. He really went into stealth mode for this one, I thought as I unclipped the bucket, placing the metal container down as softly as I could. I reached in and pulled out a Ouija board? I gasped and quickly put it back in the bucket. My parents had warned me to never mess with them. Whether you believe in spirits and demons or not, you could open yourself up to some bad stuff. It simply wasn't a risk worth taking. "Tim, why'd you send me this?" I said, my harsh tone evident. "You don't want to play with it?" Tim said. "No, those things can be dangerous. Plus, I'll get in huge trouble for messing with them." "Ah, come on, it'll be fun." I stopped for a second, thinking of how weird this was. Tim was definitely acting weird, and now that I thought about it, he was never interested in Ouija boards. Why would he suddenly want to send one to me? I couldn't stand the idea of getting in trouble for some stupid lapse of judgment he had. I immediately clipped the bucket back to the line and began feeding it back to him. When I saw it made it to the treehouse, I sat back on my bed. "Here, take it. I don't want it." Tim said nothing back. "Tim?" There was an eerie silence, and then I heard the familiar sound of the bucket being unclipped and set down. I tried calling him a couple more times, but he wouldn't respond. Yet I knew he was there. Despite his silence, I could faintly hear labored breathing. Tim, stop. You're creeping me out. Maybe you should go back home. My pulse quickened at his repeated silence. Then the fact that it was very late dawned on me. Tim never came here after 10 o'clock, and his weird behavior coupled with that made me very uncomfortable. One more thing before I go, Tim whispered suddenly, making me jump. I heard the squeak of the clothesline moving. I looked out the window. This went on for a moment, but the bucket wasn't coming my way. Hey, what are you sending? I said into the tin can, but was again met with the unnerving silence. I sat back on my bed, then felt something small drop on my shoulder. It was wet, so I looked at the clothesline and noticed something looked off. The light from my bedside lamp was too low to illuminate it, so I grabbed a flashlight, shining the light on the clothesline. I suppressed a scream when I saw the clothesline was covered in blood. I had to wait a second to calm myself down. Whatever game Tim was playing, I needed him to stop. Just as I stood up to look out my window again, I heard the familiar sound of my doorknob turning. My heart leapt into my chest as I turned. Honey? The sound of my mom's voice echoed into the room. She peered in, and I instantly felt relief. I'm awake. You have a visitor. Cold needles pricked my skin as I saw Ted walk into the room, a puzzled look on his face. Josh? You're not in the treehouse? A blanket of icy needles made me visibly shiver as I turned to look back at the treehouse. There was a light on inside, illuminating the face of a ghastly creature covered in dark smoke. He smiled back at me and waved a bloody hand. I rolled to the floor to avoid the creature's gaze. I felt like I would go insane if I looked at it any longer. Josh, what's the matter? My mom rushed over to me. I don't remember much about the rest of that night, but I do remember stuttering out the entirety of what had happened. Apparently, Tim saw a shadowy figure climb into the treehouse. He begged his parents to bring him over to see if I was in my room so that we'd know if it was a prowler. My dad had rushed outside with a gun, but found nothing except the bucket with a Ouija board still inside. He promptly burned it. My mom didn't tell me until later, but they researched the history of our home and found out there used to be a cult that lived in our house. They used the tree in our backyard for ritual sacrifices, some of which include hanging people from one of the tree limbs. The next day, my dad destroyed the treehouse, and we never played in that backyard again. For years, my dad swore he had heard chanting and an occasional scream from that awful tree. He took it one step further and cut the tree down. Even then, he would sometimes hear the rhythmic creak of the wood as if something was swaying to and from a phantom limb. Thank you so much for listening. Please like the video and subscribe for more horror stories. The ocean serves as a warning. These stories recount the horrible tales from those who have been to the deep. Beneath the waves lie unspeakable horrors waiting to be discovered, and these 3 true stories will reveal just how terrifying the ocean can be. Found by fishermen and revived, the officer shares his chilling tale, but no one believes him, and he's left with dread of what he unleashed. It was discovered 25 miles off the coast of Maine by a lobster fisherman, the tip of a rusted rung ladder, stained and crusted with barnacles, jutting up through the ocean's glassy skin. You haven't heard about it on the news. You wouldn't have. The Navy buttoned it down faster than you can say Semper Fortis. Sonar scans showed the ladder descended in a vertical line for 8 miles. That's 6 miles past the ocean floor, disappearing into a newly discovered trench that made Mariana look like the shallow end of the pool. Okay, I'm being facetious, but it goes without saying that higher-ups were concerned. Who the hell had built a ladder in the middle of the ocean? Where'd this trench come from? Aliens? Russia? That's where I came in. I was an officer in the Navy's oceanography program, working on experimental, never mind. Not that it doesn't matter, it does. But if I talk about what I did, who I am, and why I'm here, I'd no doubt wake up on a trapdoor with a noose around my neck and treason charges being read to me by a guy in a starched uniform. I figure there's a damn good chance that might still happen anyways. Still, I'm compelled to document this because people deserve to know what I saw. The things that haunt the back of my eyelids when I close them at night. I'm in a military hospital now, laid up in my own private suite. I'm trying to heal, but without rest, it's proving impossible. I figure getting out of this system might help. I hope it will, at least. But what do they say in Shawshank? Hope is a dangerous thing. Anyway, I was never great at beginnings, but I guess I should start with the dive. We called it a submersible, but it was really a suit. There was no Jules Verne clunky, cumbersome, sink like a rock diving suit. It was lightweight, pressure resistant, and equipped with all the bells and whistles that lent it its not unfair nickname, Iron Man. That's not to say it was one of those skin-tight jobs you see scuba divers wearing. It looked more like those suits guys defusing bombs in war zones wear. That aside, I was thankful there wasn't going to be a 60-pound oxygen tank misaligning my spine. The Iron Man was equipped with an electrolysis filter, which converted ocean water into breathable oxygen. The whole shebang was invisible on enemy radars, and could supposedly withstand a descent of this stature. Not that it had been tested. Basically, I'd been crawling down an ominous 8-mile ocean ladder in an experimental suit that had only been tried in Navy swimming pools. My colleagues seized on this predicament, jokingly calling me Leica in the hours leading up to the dive. In case you're not familiar, Leica was the dog Soviets shot up into space in the 50s, the dog who died. So as I stood on the helm of a small Navy vessel, also experimental, don't even ask, looking at the first few rungs of the ocean ladder, which sat 20 feet off the starboard, I wondered if this was my last taste of fresh air. I hope your lunch wasn't too risky, my colleague Matilda joked with a smirk. Blowing gas in that thing, you'll probably suffocate. I smiled, but behind my smile were nerves, raw, tingling nerves. I think she saw, because her hand landed on my shoulder. You'll do fine, Jones. This time, I smiled for real, hoping she was right. Nearby tech asked me if I was ready. I nodded, and the bulky submersible's helmet descended me like a meteor. I really was Iron Man. The big window visor on the front of the helmet doubled as a screen with oxygen and depth readings, as well as direct comms to and from my people above the surface. There was a POV camera, which fed them my perspective as well, so they could monitor and record my descent, which had started an hour ago. I climbed down, rung after rung, daylight fading as I descended into the murky depths. Fish darted past, a little twist of seaweed rolled by. It was all very pastoral and oddly existential. The ocean, I'm talking the vast, naked depths of it, is huge and never ending. Look both ways and you see nothing but bluish green water and swirling walls of sediment. A reminder of how incredibly small and inconsequential you are. It never much bothered me until the climb. Now I'll never touch ocean water again. You good, Jones? Matilda's voice in my ear. Yeah, hun, I'm hunky fucking dory. My deltoids are screaming. Should have put those hours in the gym. Where the hell are those taxpayer dollars going if you don't look good on a recruitment poster? I felt a smile creasing my face. The budget we got, they use models for that kind of thing. What, you're telling me that strapping young stud saying, "Forged by the sea," isn't a real seaman? What the hell did I join up for? I laughed. Sheesh, if I'd known I get this much one-on-one with you, I'd have put on the Iron Man a long time ago. I'm here too, Brady's voice. Imagine a drone operator, a gangly, pimply kid raised on Call of Duty. That's Bradley. What do they say about 3 being a crowd? I asked. They say you're closing in on 500 meters, Bradley said. Jesus, already? I looked around. It had gotten darker. The ocean around me fading into a deep, dark blue that bled into a murky cloud. I double-checked my tether. Secure. It was a thick steel cable feeding through a pulley, a thing on rollers of the size of a brick, which ran along the right outer bar of the ladder. The tether was there, in case, for some reason, I lost my grip on the narrow, rusted rungs. Because if that happened, well, anyone ever see Gravity? I shuddered at the thought of sinking down and down with nothing and no one to save me. How's breathing? Matilda asked. I smiled at the concern in her voice, looked up at the little black eye on the top right of the visor, a camera pointing down at me. They could see my face. I could, in theory, see them too, had they decided to beam some footage onto my visor screen. But this was no time for screwing around, and my visor was filled with numerical readings. On the left side sat a little map detailing the ladder and my position, a red dot on it. I had barely made a dent. Just fine, darling. The reason we weren't using a pod submersible, a single-man coffin connected to the above by a steel cable, was because I was on the lookout for any markings that might be etched into the ladder's metal skin. Anything to denote its origin. So far, there had been nothing but barnacles, crab exoskeleton, and a thick pat of algae. When can I ladder slide? Or can you throw a movie up on my screen? This is getting tedious. I was half joking, but not really. It was boring as hell. One rung after the next. To make the descent faster, I was going to ladder slide by having my hands cupped around the outside rails, feet on the outside for brakes. But I couldn't do it until I hit a certain water pressure. Some geeky nonsense about how it would be easier to control the descent. The tether wouldn't be a problem there. The pulley was built to eat through rocks and had been satisfyingly crunching through barnacles the whole way down. Once you hit 1,000 meters, Bradley's voice. You guys pick that number out of a hat? The deeper you go, the greater the pressure bearing down on you is. Makes it easier to control. Shit, I must have skipped that day at school. I joked, partly. It was in the orientation, Bradley said, not trying to hide his irritation. I think he must have been jealous of my report with Matilda. I skipped that too. Matilda chuckled. I smiled again, even though I hadn't been joking. Closing in on 750 meters, Leica, Matilda said, calling me that goddamn dog. Better hope I got a little more luck in my bones than rusky canines, I said, secretly hoping I was right. I'd hate for you guys to fish me up and just find my naked skeleton. You've got charm. That's gotta be worth something, Matilda said, a smile in her voice. Is it worth dinner next week? Bradley groaned. God, you guys make me sick. I chuckled. Aw, don't get blue, kiddo. You can carry the rings at the wedding. Matilda laughed. Dinner first. Where? I know this great place called the Base Cafeteria. 8 o'clock Friday? It's a date, I said, continued down into the abyss. I had worked up a killer sweat by the time I reached the midnight zone, which sat just past 1,000 meters. Murky blackness crushed in. It was suffocating, eerie. I clicked on my shoulder-mounted floodlights. 2 powerful beams of light blasted forward and wham! An deep-sea fish, the mouthful of fangs, went whizzing by my head. I barked a pathetic yelp and jerked back, nearly losing my grip on the ladder. What's wrong? You okay? Matilda asked, concerned. Fine. Satan's spawn just caught me off guard. Deep sea life? The deepest. Your gopher slide, Bradley said. I hesitated, suddenly not sure how I felt plunging down at speeds unknown to the deep, inky blackness beneath me. Wish me luck, kids. Luck, Bradley and Matilda said in chorus. I sucked a deep breath, moved my hands and feet off the rungs into the outer rails, and then I slid. It wasn't as exciting as I thought, but it was considerably faster and less draining than climbing down. My eyes watched the ladder blur by, still on the lookout for any markings. Once or twice, I skidded to a stop, thinking I had spotted something, only to discover it was nothing but deep sea gunk caked to the metal. By the time I did see any markings, I was too far gone for anyone to care. I stopped, not sure what I was looking at. A strange symbol etched directly into the middle of the rung in front of me. It looked like a weird cross between Arabic and Chinese. Guys, you seeing this? No reply. Hello? No reply. Finally, Matilda's voice. Jones, the footage is freaking out. You okay? I'm fine. Is this getting through though? Silence. No reply. Jones, you there? Matilda, growing concerned. I said I'm cool. Bradley, distress in his voice. Buddy, you getting us? Just fine. Can you hear me? I felt panic squeezing at my lungs. Was the comm system messed up? My screen began to flicker, glitching out. I was growing concerned. Jones, you're not coming through. I reached up to my visor and gave it a smack. The readings on screen momentarily realigned before spazzing out beyond control. Now my colleagues' voices were warbled. Words were lost, full of static. Jones, can't hear you. Are you? Guys, I can't hear you. Fear in my voice. A low hum built in my ears. And then silence. No voices. Nothing. My helmet basked in the glow of the flickering screen. I had lost contact with the world above. I froze, not sure what to do, split between the symbol on the rung and the disconnect from my safety net. Well, that's not completely true. Remember the tether connecting me to the rung ladder? There was a little button on the pulley box beneath the lucid case. Punch that button and the pulley box would zip me back up to the surface. Okay. Screw it. I was going back up. None of this was worth a damn if I didn't have my crew watching my back. I fumbled out an underwater camera stashed in the pouch of my chest, snapped a photo of the symbol, and began the 10-foot climb back up to the pulley box. That's when I saw the mermaid. It flitted out of view, the silhouette of a man-sized fish. I froze, not sure what I'd seen. It had only been there for an instant, etched in the beam of my floodlights. Then it was gone. Had I really seen anything? My breath was shallow, cold in my helmet. I looked to my right. The water was black and murky. I looked to my left. At first, I didn't realize what I was seeing. A wall of bodies. Hundreds of mermaids surrounded me, their eyes glowing pinpricks in the light, their needle-sharp teeth jagged and yellow. They were awful, deep-sea things, their tails yellow and scaly, their torsos pale and emaciated. Instead of arms, they had straw-thin appendages with hooked tips. When my light hit them, they broke apart, darting off into the darkness in a cacophony of shrill chitters. Jesus Christ, I whispered, my voice hoarse, my throat like sandpaper. I looked up and saw the pulley box, 5 rungs away, the button taunting me, the button that would save me. Or maybe I was already past the point of saving. I didn't wait. I climbed, fast as I could go, 1 rung after the next, 4 rungs, 3, 2, a shrill chittering split through the water. I looked to my left as a mermaid shot towards me, its hooked appendages clawing at my suit. I grunted and threw up a defensive arm. A razor shredded through my flesh. Blood plumed out of my ruined arm. I cried out. My suit beeped, screaming warnings in my ear. The fabric instantly sucked together, automatically sealing the breach as the mermaid flew off, and in came another. I threw the button box in the pulley open, about to slam it down when A freight train barreled through my midsection. The horrible, twisted face of the mermaid filled my visor. It had torn me off the ladder. I floated, entangled with this awful creature. Its gills undulated as it chittered in my face. A great ear-shredding sound that cut a bolt of fear through my stomach like an icy dagger. I grunted and jammed my fingers into its gills, hating the way its flesh crackled as I twisted. Now the mermaid was struggling out of my grip. I was winning, then I wasn't. Something pounded into the ladder, jarring the pulley box, and something else hammered into my back. It was like being caught in a trash compactor, a dozen of these things crushing in on me. I screamed, flailed, fought for my life. Then suddenly, the mermaids disappeared, tails flickering as they flew off into the depths. I was alone, completely alone, floating through the water, 15 feet from the ladder. I assessed the damage. My suit was mostly okay, except for my arm. Blood plumed through the fabric, funneled out and into the ocean. Each section of Iron Man was isolated, so if one part got damaged, it wouldn't compromise the integrity of the whole outfit, so water wasn't flooding my helmet. Yet, it very well could be soon. There was a crack in my visor. I quickly reeled myself in, closing in on the ladder and the pulley box, which was my last and final hope. Then I saw it. My heart sank. My stomach dropped. The pulley was nearly hanging off the ladder's rail. It was close to breaking off. If that happened, I'd simply drift, fall, die in this oppressive darkness. I moved slowly, surely, reeling myself in on the cable, which rattled the box. With each pull, I was lassoing the excess cable around my elbow as I went. My hands reached out, fingertips skimming the rung ladder. That's when I saw the shark. At first, I thought it may have been a mountain that slid off land some long ago year, left to float these murky depths eternally. But no, it was a shark, the biggest living thing I've seen in my whole life. It must have been twice the size of a Boeing 747, a great pale monster outlined in my floodlights, eyes as big as swimming pools. Its mouth, I couldn't bear think what might be in its mouth. Oh my God, but that didn't seem to be enough. Oh my fucking God. It filled my horizon, moving closer. I was paralyzed by fear, my heart jackhammering my ribcage like a manic construction worker. My hands reached out for the ladder, grabbed a rung, started to pull myself up when the pulley box broke free of the outer rail. I looked up and slipped. My hand slipped. My other hand shot out, grasped the ladder, and then a rush of water blew me away. The shark was passing, and I was sinking, propelled downward by the force of the shark's movement, displacing impossible tons of liquid as it swam. I flailed, grunted, screamed, the readings on my visor still flashing warnings. Then I was being sucked down into the depths. The shark continued on. I drifted down, the ladder slowly, painfully pulling away from me until it faded from my view. I tried calling to my people above, screaming into my helmet. At some point I stopped, realizing they were long gone. And to them, so was I. I sunk for years. It felt that way at least. Left to die, a prisoner of the ocean, stranded in a world of darkness. After a while, still sinking, I blacked out. I jolted awake at the bottom of the trench, in the ruins of a great city. Pillars of rock, spires of stone, the husks of incredible mausoleums and colosseums rose around me, greenish in their eon-old patina. The city filled the trench as far as I could see, which was oddly far, seeing its strange glowing orb filled my horizon. It was an impossible sun, a green ball of light, pulsing and bubbling with heat, hovering off in the distance, bathing these alien depths in ethereal light. I stood up. A thin tendril of blood trailed up through the fabric from the gash on my forearm. I knew it wasn't a mortal cut, but it was nasty and left me feeling woozy. I cinched it tight with a Velcro strap and looked around. There was nothing but dead buildings stretching endlessly. Ugly, deep-sea fish cut through vacant windows and doorways. I wandered the city for a while, looking for signs of life or any vestiges of the ladder that had brought me here. I found neither. I walked for a while. Hours, days maybe. I slept some. I woke and walked more. Time must have worked differently down there. The atmosphere felt languid and disorienting. I'm not sure how long I spent wandering. I found sprawling pictographs on the inside of a domed building. They depicted an aquatic people that once ruled this underwater world. I saw 100-foot effigies of a multi-headed dragon-like beast with a multitude of clawed legs and variety of gills spread out across its form. Among them were other, smaller statues of the beast rolled into a ball. Sometime during my interminable sentence spent in that sunken kingdom, I realized the ball statues were depicting the beast's likeness as an infant curled up in an egg. That gave new meaning to the glowing green orb on the horizon. Sometimes, after staring at the green sun for hours, I thought I could decipher the outline of the fetal beast wrapped in on itself, pulsing with life, waiting to be born. Eventually, my mind slipped away from me. I heard voices, Matilda's, Bradley's. A barking dog I thought might have been Lakia. Sometimes I spoke to them, other times I didn't. just grateful for the company. And then after a long, long while, I died. I was brought back to life on a lobster boat. 2 grizzled mariners with accents like molasses found me floating listlessly and pulled me aboard. They scraped off my suit and resuscitated me on the fish gut-strewn deck of their little lobster tug. They thought I was dead. My skin was cold, pale as a fish belly. Then I blinked to life. I took a rattling breath of fresh air, savoring the salty taste on my tongue. I looked up at the real world, at the 2 men around me. All I could do was cry. I was brought to a hospital, then airlifted to the one I'm in now. Matilda came to visit me immediately. She asked me what had happened. I told her. I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. I wouldn't believe me. I was gaunt, my hair long, my beard scraggly. I looked like I had survived a lifetime on a desert island, except for the fact I was ghostly pale and not sunburned to a crackling brown. But it was good seeing her, until she looked me in the eyes and told me I had been missing for 8 months. Military man after military man came to visit me, higher ups in crisp uniforms weighed down by medals. I was interviewed until my head spun. My story never changed. I told them to check my handheld camera. I learned it was never recovered. Whether they didn't believe me or didn't want to wasn't entirely clear. I had my scar to back up my story and my time spent missing. I told them to send another man down, but they gave me some bureaucratic word vomit about how the risk assessment, blah, 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 blah. Apparently, that suit I'd taken down wasn't cheap. Who would have thought? In the end, none of what I said seemed to matter. Perhaps they figured me a deserter who took their top secret tech and defected to God knows where. Trial from my door. Maybe. All I know is that at some point or another, I was declared insane and ordered to a stint of convalescence where I remain. I've tried to make sense of it all, but I can't. I wonder about the latter and whether it was built as an invitation to that underwater place or as an escape. Since I've gotten back, there's been a hollow ache in the center of my chest, a low hum in the pit of my soul. It's constant. It's dread. Dread at what I've seen. Dread at what might be growing in that green sun. Dread at what might become of the world if that thing ever rises to reclaim its kingdom. I've come to the end of my tale, and I still don't feel any better. Every time I close my eyes, I see that green sun. I see it pulsing and flickering with life, and now I know for certain. It's an egg. The ocean floor teems with life, colors, and wonder until darkness falls and the abyss reveals its sinister secrets. Spending a week at the bottom of the ocean is pretty much as crazy as it sounds. You get into a tin can with a couple other people and they lower you into the ocean. You sink to the seafloor and live in the airspace at the top of the can for a week. There's not a lot of space when you're breathing fresh air down there. So the only reason to go is if you live to scuba. That's all there is to do down there. Normally, you get an hour of dive time for each tank of oxygen you're carrying. So every hour, you have to go back up to the surface from the bottom of the ocean, which takes time. When you're living down there, it's different. Your dive time becomes limited only by your endurance. We set up fast refill stations and use high-powered hoses to refill our tanks with oxygen. That way you can stay in the water as long as you want. Hours fly by while you're down there, and you can never get bored. It's a whole different planet on the seafloor, and who wouldn't want to spend all day staring at aliens? Fish of countless varieties swim past, in all the colors of the rainbow. Sea turtles, and octopus, dolphins, and manta rays, sharks, and whales. You'll see it all. Not to mention the unparalleled beauty of the coral reefs themselves, and all the plethora of life forms that dwell symbiotically within it. The only thing I didn't like was nighttime at the bottom of the ocean. You'd look out from the habitat into utter blackness, darker than anything you've ever seen. And how can you not imagine what's out there? We had seen sharks, giant octopus, and barracudas swimming nearby. There's also everything else your imagination can come up with. Everything you've seen on movies and TV that isn't even real. Amphibious humanoids who look like the Swamp Thing, who creep up silently from the kelp and grab your arm with their hands. Dotted with suckers like the tentacles of an octopus, giant krakens, and massive dinosaur sharks left over from the Jurassic period, and all other manner of nightmares could be out in that darkness. If you spent a week down there, you'd begin to realize too just how ignorant we are of the world that exists in tandem with ours. You try to avoid those thoughts when you're out of the habitat at night. You have to leave the habitat to go to the bathroom, so there's no avoiding it if you need to go number 2. One night, I was woken by a rumbling in my stomach around 3 a.m. It was dark inside the tin can we called home, silent except for the sound of water splashing up against the inside of the lab. My stomach lurched again, this time more urgently. I realized I would need to go outside, put my mask on, but didn't take my regulator or oxygen. Since the little hut we used as a toilet wasn't far away, maybe 20 feet, I could easily hold my breath for that long. The light from the hut gleamed ahead of me as I dove down into the darkness, my mind still foggy with sleep. The dim bulb on the outhouse was the only other light in this universe, so I went to it with urgency for more than one reason. When I got there, I popped up into the little air bubble inside, pulled down my trunks. I had made it just in time. Pretty soon fish were coming by for their morning meal, and I swatted at them with my hand, trying to pinch it off before they could burrow their little faces further into my ass crack. Freaking fish just love to eat shit. As if that wasn't nightmare enough, there was that blackness all around except for the light from the outhouse and the one from the habitat. The darkness stretched out forever and was infinite in its mystery. I wondered how far away the nearest great white shark was, and if they would be attracted to the scent of a smaller fish. I shook my head and tried to think of anything else. It was completely silent, except for my breathing and the sound of water splashing gently against the inside of the hut. I finally pulled out my trunks, slapping a fish with my hand as I did so, and waited for a minute for the air to clear, so to speak. No sense rushing the dive back into the blackness, I thought, especially considering what I just polluted it with. After a minute, I took a breath and popped back into the water from the air bubble. I swam towards the light of the habitat. When I was not even halfway there, both lights flickered and went out. I was immediately disoriented. My foggy mind had just been asleep a few minutes ago, and I wish I'd taken longer to wake up before venturing out alone. I hadn't even woken anyone else up to tell them I was going. The after image of the glow from the habitat still danced in my vision, so I followed it, my heart beating fast and heavy in my chest. I felt terrified and hoped I was heading in the right direction. I followed my instincts and training, tried to ignore the part of my brain that told me I might not be going the right way. I felt something large brush against my hand and recoiled in shock. What the hell was that? I wondered. I was suddenly picturing a giant hammerhead right in front of me instead of the habitat. My panic intensified. My vision was starting to go a bit red around the edges, and I wondered how much time I had wasted. It was a good thing I could hold my breath for a long time. I tried to swim in the direction of the habitat, but I suddenly wasn't sure which way it was anymore. The thing that had brushed against my hand had felt large, and it had scared me more than a bit. Kicking with my flippers, I began swimming in the direction I thought was right. Whatever it was, this time it was on the other side of me. I tried to ignore my fear and kept kicking my legs. My vision was beginning to flood with redness, and I was really starting to feel true dread and fear bloom inside me like I had never felt before. Every part of me was screaming for air. I tried to calm my mind and remember my training. My hand grabbed onto something, and in my confused and oxygen-deprived state, I mistook it for a power line running to the outhouse. I began to pull myself along the misshapen tube. It seemed to squirm and writhe in my hand, but I continued along nonetheless, hoping it would lead me back to the habitat. As I got closer, I felt more of the weird, organically shaped tubes. They felt lumpy and had spikes and divots here and there. I realized with disgust they were definitely not oxygen or electrical lines. They seemed to stick to my hands when I grabbed onto them, not wanting to let go. I had to pry my hand off the last time, decided to stop touching them altogether. Just as I was about to lose all hope, my left hand brushed up against the hard, metallic edge of the habitat. I had almost gone by it. I realized with a wave of horrified relief, I had almost swam right past it and out into the open water. I felt the shape of it and managed to correct my path. I popped my head up into the habitat and gasped for air, panting and coughing up water from my lungs. I climbed out of the water and managed to find the ladder leading up to my bunk. Shit, I almost died out there just now, I yelled, and was surprised when no one woke up to ask if I was okay. I felt a new fear well up inside of me, thinking of all the tangled organisms that had been all over the outside of the habitat. What the hell were those things? Why wasn't anyone talking or waking up inside the lab? I rummaged through my things and pulled out my flashlight, wishing I'd brought it with me earlier. How stupid. If I had died, I would have deserved it. I turned the light on and screamed. There was no rational explanation for what I saw inside the habitat. The other two members of my crew were surrounded by what appeared to be misshapen tentacles, but no, that's not quite right. Not tentacles. These were different. The long tubular shapes that came up out of the water reminded me of a recent article about a creature that had been discovered off the coast of Australia. It was now recorded as the longest creature ever seen by man. It was really a collection of zooids that came together and cloned itself of thousands upon thousands of times to create an infinitely long, silly string that could stretch for hundreds of meters. The crew had called it akin to an underwater galaxy, and pictures of the creature looked otherworldly. It went on forever, a twisting, spiraling organism that faded off into the distant ocean with no end in sight. This was like that, only much worse. The creature appeared to have mutated. It had picked up some new abilities never seen before in all of my research. The thing had absorbed other marine life somehow. I saw barracuda with sharp teeth, small sharks, and eels, their eyes wide and terrified, opening and closing their mouths. They were covered with a thin membrane and appeared to have been attached to the thing against their will. They were now prisoners of it, being dragged along by the massive, ropey sea creature. My crew had the tentacle things all around them, choking them at their necks and wrapped around their bodies and arms. The white flesh of the thing was spreading across them quickly, wrapping them up in its slimy sheath. My crewmate, Mike, tried to scream, but his voice was muffled as I saw a vine of the creature crawl down his throat, planting little roots as it went. I was terrified, hyperventilating. I ducked back into the furthest corner of my bunk and watched in horror as the thing consumed my crewmates rapidly and attached itself to them. I watched as it pulled them under and dragged them down into the ocean, their eyes still wide and afraid. Would it the ocean water through its gills so they could live down there? I wondered. Would it provide oxygen to the new members of the colony, or would it just consume them for fuel and move on? No one would have believed me if I told them what happened, so I said it was a diving accident. I told them I tried to save Mike and Beth. There wasn't anything I could do. Search party had turned up nothing, as I had expected. When I got back to the surface, told my family I would never step foot in the sea again. They think it's because I'm remorseful. They think I just feel bad about Mike and Beth, but that's not it. I feel bad about them, sure, but what I really think about is what's down there, under the surface. I saw how fast that thing consumed them. I think about the transatlantic garbage patch and how that was a big problem for a while. I think we might have a new problem now. The loneliest whale's search for connection unleashed an unstoppable horror. Now, humanity's fate rests in the hands of the sole survivor who heard the whale's song. In 1989, we detected a faint call coming from the depths of the ocean, a strange cry from a massive creature traveling alone in the vast blue waters below. At first, it sounded like an oddity, a malfunctioning hydrophone, but then we heard it again in 1990 and 1991. With only 5% of the ocean explored, it baffled us. To any untrained ear, it sounded like a whale, but its pitch was too high, measuring at a frequency of 52 hertz. It meant that the song couldn't be understood by any known species of whale. Thus, it was destined to exist on its own, and has been dubbed the loneliest creature in the world. We called him Blue 52. Every year, we'd hear the lonesome wail measured through hydrophones spreading across the west coast of America and Canada. Still, it wouldn't be until 2019 before we finally lay eyes upon it. Our crew was tasked with finding him, tag him with a tracker, and observe for others like him. On board the RV Song of Solitude, we traversed the northern Pacific in search of a whale that had been heard but never seen. With technology constantly advancing, tracking it had become a much easier task. While it took us weeks just to locate him, we grew closer with each passing day. Do you think he knows? Rita asked as we stared out at the horizon. The ocean was calm, gently rocking our large research vessel. It was wonderfully peaceful. Though our mission was interesting, it carried an undeniable hint of dread. Knows what? I asked. She sighed. That there are others like him out there? It was a fair question, whether or not the strange frequency of its voice was caused by a deformity, or if it was a hybrid species. It had to have been raised by someone. Whale calves stay approximately 1 year with their mothers, as they grow and get ready to face the oceans alone. I don't know, why else would he sing? The whale had been traveling in the same path as blue whales, yet the timing was off. It meant that despite it going exactly the same way, it would never meet anyone else on its journey. Wherever he swam, the others would be long gone. 40 years alone, just looking for someone else. She trailed off. Weeks passed as we searched, and in the late summer of 2019, we finally found him. There it was, surfacing for a breath of fresh air, an 80-foot-long whale, spurting a fountain of water from his blowhole. He had a magnificent blue color, yet the shape of his body resembled that of a fin whale. Our theory of it being a hybrid had been confirmed, and he looked extraordinarily healthy considering that he'd survived on his own for so long. He's magnificent, Rita exclaimed in excite. Without hesitation, we planted a tracker on his skin with a suction cup, then let him dive back beneath the ocean. We went to work and recorded more of his song, a somber tune of melancholy. We spent the next 3 weeks just tracking him, hoping to see another of his kind. Alas, he remained alone. During the nights, I often found Rita staring out at the ocean, marking each time he surfaced to breathe. He looks too sad. How can you tell? I asked. I don't know, just a gut feeling, I guess. Poor Eros. Eros? Yeah, I figured we're the closest thing he has to a family. We ought to be the ones naming him. I mulled over the name for a moment. It certainly sounded better than Blue 52. Bit ironic though, don't you think? Not at all. As the mission went on, Rita started sleeping less and less. She was afraid that we'd lose Eros if we didn't keep a constant eye on him. Whales hardly ever sleep, constantly needing to resurface, always on the move. Of all the mammals, they have the lowest requirement for sleep. We were 2 months into our mission when I was shook awake in the middle of the night. As I opened my heavy eyes, I saw Rita standing above me with a wild smile on her face. There's another whale, she shouted. We rushed to the control room where Captain Banks stood, eyes fixed on a new set of frequencies. Sure enough, There were two distinct but similar sources of sound coming from about 1,000 feet below. I knew it! I knew Eros wasn't alone. Suddenly, our depressing job had turned to one of joy. If there were two, we could assume with high probability that there were more. In fact, we might have been witnessing the beginning of a new subspecies of whale. It was a beautiful moment to behold. You sure it's not just a malfunction? One of the crew members asked. I took a look at the numbers. Eros' voice had lowered a bit in his later years, at 50 hertz, while the other, new source, was slightly higher pitched. Could it be a calf? No idea. The sonar isn't picking anything up. We need to get closer. We waited until morning and tried to get closer to Eros. According to the sonar readings, there was a creature roughly twice the size of our whale, swimming a couple of thousand feet beneath the surface. Even for a whale, it was huge. About an hour passed, and we finally caught Eros coming up for air. Despite tracking two distinct beings, only one of them ever breached the surface. Do you see anything? I asked. No. It's not coming up. Are we sure it's a whale? What else could it be? I don't know, but even whales can't hold their breath forever. We discussed the possibility of a new species entirely, but before we could even alert our superiors back on the mainland, we heard something else. It was a third song, then a fourth, and a fifth. Before long, a whole pod of these creatures had been detected. They were massive, far larger than any known creature to occupy the ocean. It was a frightening but intriguing discovery. We were ordered to send down a submersible drone to get an actual view of the beings. I controlled the machine as it quickly descended down 1,000 feet. We held our breaths as the light of the sun gave way to the darkness of the ocean. Before long, we'd be right on top of the unidentified animals. Where the hell are they? Captain Banks asked. There, I saw something. It was Eros, diving down to follow the drone. He seemed to understand the device belonged to us and started leading us towards the other creatures. We followed Eros down further, 2,000 feet below the surface, before we finally found them. At first, all we saw were yellow, glowing orbs dangling in the darkness. Then, we saw the true monstrosities we discovered. They're not whales, Rita gasped. They looked like torn pieces of bright green flesh, bobbing up and down like jellyfish through the water. They had massive bodies covered in glowing blisters. Dozens of tendrils reached out from their mangled mass. What we assumed to be their heads had multiple dark holes with thin membranes through which they emitted their songs. What are they? I asked. Before my question could be answered, one of the crew members shouted out in protest. All we heard was a splash. Someone dropped into the water. Wait, no, he shouted. What happened? Captain Banks asked. Simon, he just took an anchor and jumped off the ship. We peeled our eyes in a hopeless search for the lost sailor, but he was long gone. Call the mainland. Tell them what happened. Captain Banks ordered. Get the drone back up. It's time to leave. I glanced back at the screen. Camera had gone dark. We'd lost contact with the drone. With little hesitation, we decided to set course for the coast. The footage would serve as enough documentation of our discovery. We were still days away from reaching land, and we didn't have any other choice. Nightfall came and plunged us into the overwhelming darkness. Nothing but a million stars above us to keep us lit up in the night. Despite their beauty, they signified the immense size of emptiness surrounding us. What do you think we just saw? I asked the captain. He looked over the multiple recordings we'd gotten from our hydrophones. They all matched the voice of Eros in terms of frequency, yet the rhythm seemed completely off. Whale songs can travel 100 miles, no problem. Based on the composition of these things, I'd say they were airless creatures. It would suggest that they come from the very depths of the ocean beneath us, but I can't say for sure. You think Eros alerted them with his voice? He nodded. Why else would they venture this far up? Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of an anchor moving on deck. We rushed outside to find Rita standing by the edge, staring longingly into the ocean below. Rita, what are you doing? They're calling for me. Who? The dancers of the sea. Their songs are so beautiful. Don't you hear them? Rita, please step away from the edge. Captain Banks begged. I took a slow step towards her, ready to snatch her away from the edge. Before I could even get close, she just stepped over and fell into the water. Rita! I shouted in despair as she sank out of sight. By the time we could even turn around to search for her, she'd been too far gone to rescue. Anyone that willingly jumped into the depths could never be rescued. Captain Banks jumped on the radio, getting ready to demand an airlift back to the mainland. Yet, the only sound that greeted us on the other end was the damn song from the depths. Whatever these creatures were, they interfered with our system, making it impossible to call for help. We were effectively trapped. On the ocean, 100 glowing orbs appeared. The creatures, despite coming from thousands of feet below, had the ability to surface, and they were heading straight for us. Oh God, there was all I could get out before the ship shook violently. A tendril reached out from the water and grabbed onto one of the crewmen. He screamed in agony as it pierced his abdomen, pulling him into the water. Captain Banks took a knife and tried to cut one of the tendrils that had wrapped around our deck. It was a futile task, and another quickly wrapped around his leg, instantly snapping the bone within. He screamed as the creature tore at him, digging into the leg and reaching through his abdomen. He was dead before he even hit the water. The ship started to topple over, and I clung to the railing. Then something rammed us, and the ship fell back into place. The tendrils retreated back into the ocean, and we were momentarily free. I looked for any sign of my crewmen, but they'd all been snatched away. Alone, I peeked into the waters and saw what had been my unlikely hero. It was Eros. He had plunged his massive body into the monster, which had redirected its attention towards him. It dug its tendrils into his body, blood filling the water. He kept swimming, pulling away from the monstrosities, and they followed. In his wake, he left a trail of blood, leading them away from my damaged vessel, giving me an opportunity to escape. I set course in the opposite direction, not hesitating to make use of the escape window granted to me. The creatures didn't follow, but I never stopped fleeing. It took another full day before I finally made contact with the mainland. I alerted them to the situation. They sent a ship out to meet me. I'd sustained minor injuries. My crew, on the other hand, had all but succumbed to the horrors of the ocean. I don't know what happened to Eros, if he managed to get away or if the things caught up with him. Whatever the case, he saved my life, and I owe him everything. In his search for a family, he inadvertently awoke something from the deepest parts of the ocean. According to recent hydrophone recordings, there are millions of them across the Pacific, and they're spreading further and further around the world. The seas are no longer safe, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. I might have made it back to shore, but what truly horrifies me is that despite being 1,000 miles away, I still hear them singing. At first, they were only sounds, but now I finally understand. They want me to come to them, and I don't know how long I can resist. The ocean is terrifying. It brings out a sense of aloneness. We don't know what lurks in the shadows, much like an abandoned small town, which I've read 3 scary stories about on screen now. Please like and subscribe with notifications for more voices from the well.